Right, this is going to be our special Worlds Mega Bonanza / loads of people come on, and at the end, Monty awkwardly goes, well, anyway, thanks for coming on this section. Remove him from the call. No, and then we'll be back next with someone else who didn't get hired to work Worlds this year. You know, because that's now our demographic, Monty. Because, you know, back in the day, we used to be the sort of the kingmakers. We used to have the people who were doing Worlds on the show. Now we just have the other people exiled to the wilderness of not doing Worlds. So welcome, Hawks. What that means is this, though. Here's the funny thing, though. Normally, Hawks, that would be like a diss. Like, that would imply your career's going badly, you know nothing about the game. Actually, based on what I can tell, it actually implies you must be really good. Because that's essentially, if someone's really good, but not about LCS or LEC, they're definitely not allowed to work the World's broadcast, I've noticed. I don't know how that works, what sort of Venn diagram overlap it is, but obviously there's bias there, isn't there? So you're cast into the category with Nymaera, Lyric. They're all pretty good, mate. They're top of their class for me. So welcome.
Yeah, I ain't complaining. It is what it is, you know, with the whole Will situation. But I feel like, you know, part of me is still happy that I get a cast like a region that consistently has good games. Whereas, you know, if I'm working perhaps one of the other regions, you only get like a taste of it. Like you get that little taste.
I mean, in your case, you actually genuinely are an enthusiast. You also do love those regions and want to watch the games, right? That's sustaining in itself, I'm sure. It's dope to work the region still.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, obviously I worked in the LPL. That was fantastic. Now on the LCK, I feel like I've been kind of blessed to cover both of those regions.
Now, here's the thing, Orcs, though. If people don't know, Orcs obviously works on the LCK, right? I'm just going to start at the very outset by saying this, Orcs, which goes like this, right? In some ways, he isn't on our show anymore, but move aside, Crumbs. It's over for you. The new prophet, the new prescient Kwisatz Haderach of League of Legends is Orcs, because when that final happened, the LCK guys, we were all riding that narrative where we like, obviously GenG's going to win. It is but one step on the golden road. That is the Grand Slam. When they win, finally, all the Faker fans were wrong. Chovy is the greatest player of all time. This is the best team ever. So if you saw, I even made this point, Monty, it's not even like normal. You know, on the LCS or Worlds, they used to do like just 3 people did a prediction, like, you know, just the people on the desk. They even did on LCK, like every person who like could speak English, basically. It was about 15 people or something mental, and every single person picked GenG to win, obviously, except Orcs. And then this is the most based part. He also picked Hanwha to win 3-2, which is like, Come on, give us some reasoning. Was that completely out of left field? What was the angle? Why 3-2? Because obviously it was. So how did you do it?
So, I mean, honestly, to be honest, there was one other person who was going to go Hanwha Life Esports on the Korean side. I can't remember who it was, but they changed their vote that morning. Because I was speaking to Yunda, who takes our votes, and he was like, yeah, there's one other person, and then they switched, and he was like, you know, you shit? I'm like, I'm in, I'm all in, but
Well, you got the chance to turn down, right? I see he's trying to like peer pressure you, like, look, all those cool kids have voted for GenG. Don't you want to be on our table? And you were like, sorry, I'm going to study in the library on my own, eating a sandwich. It's all good.
Yeah, you know, there's potential for flack, because some of the Korean fans, for some of my all-pro votes, definitely felt like I was just, you know, just doing it to be hip, like voting differently to be hip with like my platter vote.
Right.
But my reasoning behind it was, it sounds really weird, but the first series they have where Hanwha lost 3-1 actually gave me a lot of confidence, because the way kind of everyone was viewing GenG was they're kind of unbeatable across the course of the season.
Yeah.
But in that game, like game 1, I feel like Hanwha Life Esports just looked better. It looked like it wasn't like they had necessarily like a really insightful draft. It wasn't like, you know, there was some complete flubs by GenG. It felt like bar for bar, HLE were just outperforming. And I was like, oh, so they actually can challenge them. And then the subsequent games happened, and this is a sort of cope that like a Hanwha Life Esports fan would say. But like every single game after that, you could kind of just be like, well, they completely grieved draft. Or so like game 2, they played MF Leona into Calista Renata and they didn't swap. And so they just got dove at level 3 games over. And then game 3 was the one where they went like all the tanks and the Senna and Azir into Nasus as the only DPS, and it was just doomed in draft. And then game 4, they were just boom. So like the way I was looking at it was like the one game where I feel like odds were even, HLE won, and then all the other ones, it was just unwinnable. And I was like, you know what? It sounds weird. And that's like, I went a 3-2 vote, right? And there was a real chance it was just a 3-0, because like game 1 was so close, and then GenG won 2 after. But like that game 1 gave me hope, And then kind of seeing them beat T1, I was like, I actually think they can do it. And like, with any prediction like this, I don't go in going like, oh, Hun Life Esports 100% got this in the bag, and it was close. But I just thought they had the potential to win, and when I think a lot of people didn't. That's why I went for the vote, and then it came through, and now everyone thinks I'm a genius, so I ain't complaining.
Sure.
Hey,
I will say, by the way, the obvious angle we should initially focus on, let's just talk about Hanwha for a second. I do think the obvious angle there that it'll tell you if someone watched LCK Summer or not, which is what people's opinion on. I call him Zika because unfortunately in the LPL they used to say that when I watched it Hawks. Like, I know people want to say Zeka now because there's the player Zika with an I that plays for LNG, which makes it tricky. But I personally don't find it tricky because, spoiler, they don't play the same position or in the same team or ever match up, and then they'll never play the same champion. So I don't know. I think that's a bit nitpicky. So I just say what I say. And I tend to say what the original broadcast said because it gets imprinted in my brain. So Zika, as I call him, the mid laner of Hanwha Life Esports, I do think this summer, anyone following that narrative of past years, or especially in spring, of like, he's actually like crap and he just ints and he's the prison warden of Viper. That's not even true now. He actually had a very good split, it looked like, in summer. And I've got to say, in some of these playoff games, mate, if you actually for real could do the A/B test and take the nameplate off and just show me the player, I think a lot of people would be surprised. This player had some like real, like legit kills and carry moments and big players. So to me, that was the main angle people were always going to be down on. Because like, at the end of the day, if you look, Korean mid laners have won a lot of world championships. Like, that position is vital. I don't know yet if they're going to survive this potential mage meta switch, but he actually is, for people who haven't watched LCK Hawks. He's pretty good now, actually, Zeka, right? Or Zika, whatever you want to call him. He kind of had like a globe summer, right?
Yeah, I think he had a really good performance. I think the meta definitely favored him. As you said, mage meta worlds might be different, but I think an issue a lot of teams have in the LCK, or if they're going up against Korean teams, and particularly GenG is like the biggest sort of example of this, is if your mid laner is below a certain level, you just auto lose. And I think particularly against GenG, I mean, T1 have had this difficulty a fair bit recently, is that if you can't keep up against Chovy, not win against him, just keep up against him, the game's just over. And I feel like there was even moments where Zeka was like going above and beyond. Like there was, he found like a solo kill in the side lane against Chovy, which doesn't seem like a big deal. But I remember at the time thinking like, how rare is that? And we looked it up.
Ever catches Chovy on a side lane. No way. Yeah.
Yeah, I think we looked at it. We looked at the number, and it was like the 4th or 5th time all summer he'd been solo killed, and like it happens in the finals as well.
Fucking solo. That's so ridiculous. 4th or 5th time he was killed. He probably is just the best player in the world, mate. Come on.
Yeah.
He's just cracked it, Chovy. That's
I won't deny it. But I think
dude, I've seen a Humanoid and Adam get caught 5 times in one best of 5 series. You know what I mean? Like, give me a break.
I mean, I think the other thing too is like Hanwha looked very good, obviously, and Zeka did have an outstanding summer. But for me, a lot of the final was, so first off, I mean, in game number 1, I don't know if I think it was even. Like, GenG had that kind of in the bag until Pays decided to, arcane shift forward and int at the end of that first game. So I'm a little biased because I think like some of the play from GenG caused that game to be thrown at the very end.
A little sidebar. My favorite type of ADC in will always be the arcane shift forwards, because I always tell them that ability is supposed to be the opposite. It's supposed to make it impossible to get caught, but you're using it to get caught. So in some ways, I love that. Shout out Tactical. You will always be the best one. And I'll always put this out there, just like Nuclear made the worst naming choice ever. To call yourself Tactical, then Tactically in over and over again is just too much for me. Like, I can't handle the writing on that one, Did J.K. Rowling make your name? Maybe that's a straight fire joke. But anyway, back to the thing about Pays getting caught, yeah.
I mean, I think the other thing too is that for me, it was just a meta misread from GenG. Like the lack of priority on the Tristana was just so mystifying to me, because if you actually look at the last match of the season between Hanwha and GenG of the regular season, basically Chovy had Tristana 2 games in a row and completely dominated them. Then in the winners bracket match, we saw Hanwha just ban Tristana all the games. And in the finals, they just dropped the Tristana ban. And then when GenG has the option to take it, they don't. And also we see the priority with the Ziggs, right, coming in from Hanwha. And these are very good picks because it prevents GenG from playing the GenG way, which is like Chovy in a side lane creating pressure, right? Because you can wave clear, you can dictate the pressure game. And I think we saw how important the Trist and Ziggs picks were around the world to playing this kind of up-tempo, like pushing style. And if you don't have that as GenG, I mean, what's mystifying to me, Ox, is like you feel like this is GenG's meta. Like GenG should love this. Like this should be
Yeah.
their shit. And like they completely dropped the ball, I think in
how
terms of
mad it
getting
is,
those champions
Monty,
in draft.
that the player in game 5 who took the Ziggs was Viper, the person you'd expect wants to be on an ADC. Like, that actually shows that Admiral Life was like super willing to like fucking do a draft war, bro. It was crazy. I was scared when that draft was locked in, though, I have to say.
He actually said in interviews that he really doesn't like Ziggs, but he's
just
he's willing to play, he's willing to get down.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I feel like it's sometimes a symptom of these teams who are kind of at the top for so long, or like aren't really being challenged, that they don't feel a need to adapt and change. And I think like, I think going into MSI, we kind of had like the lane swap, which kind of I think helped GenG a lot. And then going into summer, we had like the AP junglers being really high priority. The mid picks for Chovy were fantastic. And I feel like the meta started to shift gradually. And as prios changed on some of these picks, I feel like they weren't as sharp as other teams, or what they should keep and what they should drop. And it kind of felt like they, like, not to say they were overconfident, but it did feel like kind of at times, like, they definitely had some drafts where they would just, you look at it and you're like, I'm not really sold in this draft, but it's GenG, they're probably going to win. And then they win anyway, but it's like, how much are they really learning for that situation? And I think that's the sort of thing that sometimes comes to like a boil when you get to the finals, and, one little mispriority or leaving open a pick for Zeka that he's fantastic on ends up really backfiring.
Do you think that GenG actually essentially overcooks in draft? Because I think if you look, it's one of the reasons why I personally can't abide by that like wolf take that like Piers is the MVP. Because I'm like, bro, Piers lives in a dream world for an ADC. Right? First of all, I think he actually somehow inexplicably has like one of like the best solo laners you can get. Maybe the best solo lane duo in the world, by the way. His jungler might be the best fucking jungler and can play now or both styles of jungle. And then on top of that, his solo laners can absorb infinite fucking bans and can flex a million things. Like, if you think about it, Keen and Chovy have massive champion pools. Like, so the question I have basically goes like this: do you think they actually do overcook? Because as Monty says, you would think if Tristana's available, I don't even care if it's obvious. You'd think Chovy's just locking that all the time. He's like unbeatable. Like, it's actually, there are some picks they do that are weird. Like, I get it when Keen's like making the comp work, but I feel like these guys could sometimes keep it a bit simpler and just go for like power picks more,
I think they've definitely done that, and I mean, some of the games they didn't really get punished on, but like earlier in the season when they were playing like that triple AD carry comp, which obviously worked very well, but it definitely feels like some of the comps they put together, there's like holes in them, but it's like they'll do like flexes in certain ways, or they'll move things about, and I just don't think. Oh, like even the Udyr in the finals, like I had no idea where that came from. Like, I know that Keen's played it before, but as soon as I saw that, I'm like, oh god, no.
Well,
and I feel like sometimes
the thing about that pick is it either works really well or it just completely falls on its face, right? Like, if you can create pressure there in the side lane, then great. But you're still playing into the Tristana, so is that going to work, right? And they could have picked the Trist again. Like, you absolutely could pick the Trist. Like, Peanut first picked Maokai in that game, and then on red side they could have just taken the Tristana away, but they gave it up. They gave it up again.
Yeah, I mean, I think they just lent into, especially like, I mean, it's hard to like analyze this, like, when you have a series and make this snap decision. But Pays was the 4th best AD carry in that series. And like Chovy, even though they lost it, like in that Smolder game, Chovy was trying so hard. Hard. And like every moment it felt like he was doing everything perfectly. And I'm like, if you put him on the hyper carry, especially because it feels like sometimes they lent into these comps where they have like tank top, tank jungle, tank support. It's all about the carries. And if one of those carries steps wrong, so much more weight is put on Chovy, which is fine, right? It's Chovy, but like, it's different having Chovy on Corki, who can like QR auto. Okay, I gotta wait for cooldown, so I'm really doing anything. And him on like Smolder Tristana, where he has like the reliable damage. And obviously, Smolder's getting denied most of the time, but like, yeah, I think the Tristana point is pretty valid, and especially when you're playing against like, there was a lot of the Yone games, or like there was the Vi as well, the Camille, like. They will just one-shot your AD carry, and then it's or like if you target Chovy, like if Pays isn't having a great series and you target Chovy with like no counterplay things like Via Camille, you just have nothing left.
I mean, that was game 5, right? Which is that to your point, like they draft 3 tanks, and it's like, okay, now there's just a Corki and a Kaisa, and then Hanwha has Vi ult, Yone ult, and Ziggs ult, and a Jax jumping in with Counter-Strike. Like, one of those carries is going to die immediately if you're not peeling. And the thing is, GenG wasn't even playing that comp correctly because they weren't trying to peel with Skarner. They were trying to like loop around and engage on the back line, which just causes Hanwha to all in on Corki. And like, it doesn't matter how well Chovy's playing because he just gets 100 to 0'd. And then all of a sudden Pays has to clean up and he's on a Kaisa and he just goes into the back line and Pays throws down a minefield and he just stands there looking stupid. So, I mean, I think GenG really did blunder a lot in terms of draft in this series. And to Hanwha's credit, I know we're like this sounds like us being GenG apologists, but these are faults that GenG has, and they've consistently had. I'm not going to read too much into Esports World Cup, but they came in with a wacky meta read and were seemingly very overconfident. And to Hanwha's credit, these were very good drafts, I think, from them, and they had the right priorities, and they won the series. And to not ignore Zeka's amazing performance in finals, totally deserved MVP. For me, Peanut deserved the MVP of the entire playoffs. He was phenomenal. Sure. I mean, he crushed T1 basically. But the concerns you have to continuously have with Hanwha is like, can they play this well if Peanut isn't one of, like, if not the best jungler in the world? And can Peanut be the best jungler in the world when he's traveling to Europe, which consistently has been no as an answer, unfortunately.
Yeah. But to pivot, though, let's do that then. So here's the thing, Orcs. The real problem is this. One, if you win LCK, you automatically should be a potential favourite for Worlds, because some would argue LCK could be harder than fucking Worlds if you believe GenG's the best. So already, I feel like, actually, this has ruined a lot of narratives for people. One, everyone had the GenG narrative of the Golden Road, which is gone now. But actually, for Hanwha, people wanted to do that take that went like this. Well, the reason we know GenG are unbeatable is because they're up here, and then Hanwha's here, and then everyone's below Hanwha. And it's like Hanwha's job is just be second best. But if they actually can beat GenG, bro, why can't they win Worlds? I know people are going to do the whole thing, run the whole gamut. Zeka on fucking majors. Peanut's going to choke. Doran, it's Doran at Worlds, bro. Look, I get all the narratives. They all exist. It's all great. But we have to consider it. Like, for real, they have to be like a top 3, top 4 team now. They have to be a favourite, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think most people kind of put HLE and GenG, and I think the thing that was really clear was the gap between the top 2 and 3 and 4 was really big.
Yes.
You know, HLE were definitely capable of beating GenG, and obviously proved that, even though it took a lot from GenG in terms of mistakes, draft priorities, for that gap to be necessarily met. But like, I think both of them are strong contenders. If we were on the same patch, I think T1 and Dplus weren't even close. But I think the big thing is like the patch shift. Like, I think definitely there's some areas where you can talk about maybe not favoring Home Life Esports, but I think more than anything, like whoever T1 paid off to get this patch, you know, fantastic work. Like, worth every penny, because I feel like they've struggled so much ever since lane swaps like started to become a thing again, because they like to play stuff like Kate Luck bot lane, they like to play like, you know, Zeus playing strong matchups top, and they just can't. And then as well, like you'd much rather have Faker on like a facilitator pick, like the Sandra Ari. You know, we've seen the Syndra being popular recently as well. And it just feels like everything is kind of coming through. Also, like bot tower, they made it really squishy so that to stop lane swaps. But now if you just play Kate Lux, like, what are you supposed to do? If you lane swap, you lose your tower. If you don't lane swap, you lose your tower. I feel like, you know, because that's the thing is, based on their play,
we're back to Kate Lux, Ezreal Karma, the dream.
I think it might be. I honestly think it might be, and I think if that's the case, we'll have another situation. Like, maybe it doesn't happen immediately. Maybe we get a similar thing to last Worlds, where people are like picking Alistair, and then the other team's picking Renata, and they're like, "Whoa, we can't do anything." And then Kerry goes, maybe I can pick a range champion into it, and then they just win Worlds. Like, and people, it's not. I don't even think it's cope. I think T1 just like mega high rolled on what I think the meta's going to be. And if they, you know, they still need to play in form, right? And Faker still obviously had his struggles, but I feel like they got bailed out massively, because it was still on that patch. They just looked rough, you know. They barely beat one player on KT. It was literally 1v5, and they barely managed to win. So I don't know.
Because remember, people are going to do that thing which they always do with T1, where they act like the historical narrative will always play out. So if you remember, here's the detail fact. You're the ones who all told me this, Faker fans. So I'm going to remind you, the stat goes, every time Faker goes to Worlds, minimum semi-final. Now, I'll tell you what. If there was ever going to be some hard fucking sledding to get there, it's this time, Hawks. Like, top 4 is going to be tough. I'll say this. I actually think they're borderline for the top 8. Look, obviously, you probably need, like, G2 to play well, or Team Liquid and Smurf or something, though. So it's probably still likely you can do it. But that's why the meta shift is, like, the whole excitement for T1, you notice. If there was the same patch, I'm pretty sure, actually, I think they'd go like 1-3 if it was the same patch. Like, I even think an angle that I think's really unfair is a lot of the criticism I see towards Zeus from T1. I feel like it's people ignoring something similar to what I said, contrasting peers with those others. I think Zeus is like the fucking insane pressure release valve for the draft. Like, he doesn't just play those champions because he's some weirdo who likes ADCs. He plays those champions because Faker can't play the ADCs. Like, the joke is Zeus just ends up having to be the guy in draft where you want to flex or you want to do something else at the end of your draft. He just has to take it. Now, look, some of them he's really good on, some of them he's not so good, but I think actually Zeus got underrated at some point. So the rest of the team, hasn't almost everyone had a bad split for T1. Like, there's not even really one player. They don't have like a Viper who carries no matter what. They kind of, everyone's had a downturn, right?
I feel like everyone coming out like regular season was like, you know what, Owner probably the best former looked consistent, and then he got like absolutely schooled by Peanut. And it's
shit
like,
the bed.
Well, you know, I feel like no one's had a clean split. I think Guma's been generally solid, but like as an AD carry, like how much can you do?
His problem is he didn't play this every as well, so he had that problem, didn't he?
Yeah, I think like, you know, like Carrier is not going to look as inspiring when it's not like his meta, but he looked kind of rough in some of these games on engaged picks, especially like compared to Delight and I mean less Solar Hens, but Delight.
I mean, you say that, but even on his world skin, he was having abomination plays on Bard.
Yeah, I mean, the ult, oh man, you know what's the thing? He played it again the next game, and I'm like, no way,
he did
just
much better.
It in again. No, but he actually still messed up the time in the next game, and it didn't matter. They still won, but he literally, like, it's actually impressive how well timed he was to block all the damage on the Ziggs, because there was that first one which was horrendous, and I was even saying like, if this had been like a Seeker's Arm Guard, or this had been his, like the other team's Bard, people would be praising it so much because there was like a Ornal came through. There was like the Ziggs, everything came through and it blocked it. But then in the next game, like there was a moment where like Guma threw his Ziggs ult and the Bard ult literally came in just like split second before and blocked all the damage. And they still won the fight, but I'm just like, you have a skin for this champ. Come on, man.
Here's the one thing I will say, though. Even though this, in theory, should go into the category I described before of like historical narratives that shouldn't like necessarily apply now, I've just seen it too many times, Orcs. So in the end, me and Monty had to become so incredibly cynical about LCS because for real, it looked like some like Magic the Gathering card with an aura effect, where if Bjergsen has TSM jersey on, then all opponents are feared or something. Like, it's meant up at the end, mate. People used to just into him, and I'd be watching the team fight. Like, is this some sort of mad match fixer? Like, why are they diving into him like that? So I will have to say that is the one big factor aside from the meta swap that does help T1 going to Worlds. Both the name T1 and especially the name Faker do have some sort of magical effect at that tournament, bro. Like, people just fucking lose their hands or their mind, one of the two in the middle of the moment. I feel like people so much underrate like the barrier there is like playing against certain names and the amount teams crumble. I think GenG is a great example. Like GenG T1 matchup, there are so many times where you can tell T1 are just like losing it when they're starting to lose a series against GenG. But I think especially at Worlds when you have these teams interacting against each other, and I think it was a big problem in the past. I mean, still is in series against like a Korean team or a Chinese team. They in their mind they're like they're so much better. Any advantage you get, like, okay, we need to capitalize now because we're going to lose it. And then if they're behind, like, oh God, everything's fucked. We have to do desperate things to get back in. And they just start playing completely differently. And I mean, I say it's like from a Western perspective towards the Eastern teams, but it's even like within the Eastern teams, you can definitely see like players just completely just falling apart. I mean, talking about players like that also did crack me up. Where I was telling Monty, I actually thought LCK this time did a really good job with like the really long time before the series where there was all the Brit. And one of them, I said to him, they showed that screen of what it's like when Zeke in the past had played against Chovy, and he'd only ever won once at that World Star. And then obviously that's just setting up the insane curse. They're like, well, look, you never had wins against him, and then obviously he won this one too. It's like I do love ridiculous angles that way. It just plays out that way over and over. Because essentially people don't realize the reason that narrative isn't just an idea is because it's a real idea in the minds of the players. Clearly, that's what's happening, isn't it? They're like getting back to that same headspace where even if Faker isn't actually the joke now is this is why this Worlds will really test it. this is probably the worst T1's ever come in looking like. So I think right now, if they come into this Worlds and people still do it, then it's just a mind virus in people's brain at that point in time. Like, it can't just be based off reality at this point. You know, there's a little bit of like, he's your older brother that used to hold you down and do the spit hangers on you, and like, doesn't matter, you're the same size now. In your brain, he's always up there and you're down here. That's the problem.
It's like the elephants who are in chains when they're little babies, and they grow up and they could just break it easily, but they don't. Yes. Yeah. No, I think for sure.
What an analogy. Reference. So like, are you? I want to know, Ox, are you buying like Hanwha maybe winning Worlds? Like, do you think this is something that's going to happen, or is GenG still the favorite? Because I just don't. I can't. I've seen too many Peanut international performances in my life to buy into this. That's why you
should be in. No, Monty. This is why you need to be in, because think about this for a second, Monty. Right? Peanut didn't win when he had Faker. He didn't win when he had Chovy. Bro, if he wins with Zeka and Thorin, we can just make the case he's the best jungler ever. Like, just forget about it. He won with Zeka and Thorin. Bro, he is the god. Like, at that point, it's over. What do you think, Ox? Can they do it? Is it plausible?
I mean, it's possible. It's just I think I'm not ready to like call them necessarily. Like,
a bit tentative on this, right?
They're in the top 3, but I think the problem is, like, I look at the 14-18 patch, and it's just like a wall of like everything that was meta, like getting nerfed into the ground.
Except for Yone. He's still there.
Except for Yone. So Zaka's got Yone. They'll just ban it. But
it'll just be banned. It's fine.
But like, you know, we've seen like the Warmogs being nerfed to oblivion. So like maybe melee supports are worse. Lane stop's gone, so maybe range supports are better. I feel like Delight does better on melee supports. You know, like Peanut's jungle pool for like the whole split. Teams were like banning, like triple banning Peanut, and then he still had like great picks. But like Maokai is getting nerfed at the meta, you know, Ivan's getting nerfed. I just feel like I'm not confident in where the meta is going to settle. Like, I have my ideas of where it's going to go, and I think HLE are a team who, I mean, I don't think any team is fully immune to meta shifts, but I think HLE are a team who are a bit more vulnerable. So you kind of have to see, because, you know, I've heard from some people that even though like mages are good, like still Tristana's playable in the mid lane, Smolder's still occasionally playable, and obviously Yasuo and Yone is still playable. So I think it just really depends, because I think with Worlds, so often we see the team that just hits right on the meta ends up like winning it. You know, I feel like obviously T1, I mean, like meta is such a subjective thing, because like T1 kind of said, okay, we're going to play this, but they sort of said, this is what we think works and what everyone else has established. But it just feels like if you hit right, if the patch is right for you, that can be enough just to win the tournament, which is kind of, you know, part of what I feel like happened for DRX as well, even though there were obviously other factors, like them just deciding they were good all of a sudden. But I definitely feel like Worlds, sometimes you just get teams where the patch hits right, and I think HLE, I don't think they're good enough that they're just like guaranteed locked in, irrespective of patch. I think maybe if GenG had won, people would have been saying that about them, but I don't think there's enough confidence in HLE just to say no matter what, they're golden.
By the way, this is actually, though, if you are, Monty, a GenG fan, a perfect moment to take some free credit. Because actually, I'll tell you right now, Monty, if they do win, everyone will retcon this. I had the same thing happen to me in Counter-Strike one year. What happened is, at the end of 2016, when Astralis got Glaive, and they were the team that used to always be close but never win, right? They got him, and then famously, I did that E-League tournament, and they lost in the final as an upset, right? They got beaten by this Optic team from NA. So I chose that moment where I knew actually they're going to be number one, and they'll have a real chat. Because everyone said in that moment when they lost, like, well, because no, there's no way they're going to win. So I said, well, they will definitely win this major. And not the joke is, after the fact, don't worry, when they won, everyone was like, well, yeah, but they were number one. Of course they won. Even though I've got the tweets and everything, every person said they wouldn't win. So at the same time, right, everyone mixed with the Chovy never wins world, he's not as good as Faker, and the fact that they didn't win EWC and they didn't win LCK. I actually think right now is the best time ever to rebuy into the GenG stock. Because here's the reason why I actually think no pleb thinks that they are the favourite to win. I think, if anything, I've even noticed this with analysts, a lot of people just quietly shifted their position from GenG to BLG instead, because there's no Hanwha Life in LPL. So I don't really know. I still don't really know why GenG lose the Hanwha Life makes BLG better than them. I don't quite get that one myself, but okay, I get we're doing some like transitive property here. But the thing is, I actually think the real reason why you can do a GenG pick still, it's not only are they the favourite, but the best part is everything they're good at is the shit plebs hate. hate. They hate laning, bro. They hate side laning. They hate people who, hey, stop it. They're like the UFC fan who doesn't like wrestling or Brazilian jiu-jitsu. They want you to just stand in the center and bang all the time and punch each other in the head. They hate anyone who won't do that sort of NA run, basically. So I actually think they think like GenG is like they're scared or something. It's like, no, as you said about Chovy, they basically just win. Like the joke is he actually wins the game in lane. He really does win by hitting
being in a side lane.
It's basically the joke is, Monty, he's basically playing PvE. He's the best World of Warcraft player in the world. And then you're all just trying to like play PvP and somebody's arms busy farming the game, mate. Like that's actually, that style though is mega consistent. Like the flaw in that style is crazy. I mean, all I'll say is this, just look at the loss they took here to Hanwha Life. It took everything. And it was still barely a win. Like I think
it was almost a 3-0.
It was almost
a 3-0 for GenG.
Absolutely.
So I think the issue here is when you look at GenG, I see kind of shades of Samsung White in this team from 2014. You know, it's a little bit different because obviously GenG's the reigning MSI champion. They did win one of the splits, but Samsung White, like famously, never won a domestic split when they won that world championship. And yet I thought that they were going to win worlds before going in because they were just the strongest team at the time. And it didn't matter so much that they kept losing to Samsung Blue. Like they were just better, and the odds of them hitting Samsung Blue in the bracket were low. They did end up hitting them, but they also beat them at Worlds in the semis. But I think you look at GenG and you say this team is more versatile than Hanwha Life. Their ceiling is higher. But why I say they're similar to Samsung White is that Samsung White, like very famously, got cocky a lot. They would get massive leads and then literally throw them to Samsung Blue. Like they would crush them in the early game and then throw. I see when we look at GenG a lot of arrogance about their play at some of these events. We saw it at the Esports World Cup. I think we saw it in these playoffs and in these finals. And if anything, losing these finals is probably the kick in the ass they really need to do well at Worlds. Like I think this losing the finals is actually probably the best thing that could happen to them because I think they'll just do better at Worlds as a result.
I think honestly, so many teams struggle to problem solve if they're not directly being like getting that example where they're being beaten. I honestly, I think it's a big reason as well why we see the Golden Road struggle so much because if you're not forced to change, it's so much harder to like diagnose what's wrong if you're not being punished on it, or if you're getting away with it, or like, and you won't move to a new meta. You'll be like, this is still working, we're still winning. And I think I agree with your statement that GenG losing this finals probably is going to make them push further, you know, at Worlds and actually try and think, okay, is this working for us? What is the meta? What do we need to be on?
I'd also say, just as an aside, I actually wonder as well, if you think how dominant they were in the officials in LCK, I wonder, because we'll never get to know this, there is no Remain in the Korean scene. I wonder if they just had some of those scenarios of some of the past splits, not recently. You know, like nowadays when Remain posts the scrim results from Europe, nowadays actually you do have certain times when Fnatic will get like 3 games in a 6-game set or something, or Mad Lions will win a couple. But you know, when he first started posting those last year, he would just have times where it was like they were winning like 90% of the scrims and the LEC game. I get that vibe from LCK. Like, that's why I think they can do anything in draft, bro. It looks like they just put in whatever they want into the draft and it just works in scrims and they just beat everyone. And they also, as we're saying, they have the psychological edge over all these teams as well. It's like, it would be hard to know when, like, because essentially what you're doing does work. It's just, will this work against other teams and does it work long run? Like, that's a hard judgment to make, I feel like.
It's also one of those things where, like, when you are at the top, every team puts so much effort into preparing for you.
Sure.
And like making sure like they have like specific counters to this, or they're like studying you in particular, like GenG's the team to beat, we need to do this, we need to do that, which I kind of feel like was kind of the approach. Obviously every team in summer was looking at GenG as the team to beat and went through the whole split with that sort of focus on that's the one we need to take down. So I think that's also an element where
that's why it's so gross. It was only KT Roster who weren't even fucking at Worlds. Like I told everyone that exactly is what would happen. Except I also said they might miss playoffs too. But like, fucking hell, why is KT Roster like this? Ruining everything, ruining fucking Golden Roads.
It's just amazing that they're so consistent. Like, no matter what happens, no matter how the roster changes, it's like the spirit of KT is just always there. That is truly just one of the enigmas of esports.
I know.
So let's talk about T1 and Dom1 quickly, the other two teams. Because, like, to your point, Ox, I want to bring this back around. You mentioned, you know, Caitlyn Lux is possibly being a strong lane with the changes they made to lane swaps and the turret meta. We'll get who remind me who the best Caitlyn Lux team is in the world. Like, are we saying that T1's running it back for the back-to-back?
I honestly think that the meta is like so unbelievably good for them. They couldn't have asked for it better. I mean, again, we haven't seen pro play on this patch, so this is just what I think. But like, a lot of things got nerfed out. You know, from what I've heard, it's more like these mages in the mid lane. It's more like these facilitators. It's more things like, you know, seen a bit of Syndra, Liss, Ari. You have junglers that pair up with that. Things like Viego, Ona's fantastic Viego. And I honestly think that like lane swaps, I think T1 are the team who suffered most in the world from lane swaps being a thing. So just them being gone, and based on what I've heard from like people in scrims, like some people have tried like really short lane swaps, but it's like if you're slightly too long, you can just lose like 4 or 5 plates over like the whole tower.
A level 2, like to level 2 or level 3 lane swap, right? Like that should still be somewhat possible, maybe.
It's that's the thing. I've heard it's risky. It's possible, but like the other team are ready for it, and they're like, okay, we're just gonna 4v0. We have like 2 or 3 demolishes. You'll lose your whole tower, and the game's over. So I think T1 have everything they need. I think it's a blessed meta for them, and it just comes to like whether they can like step up and show the level of play that's needed. Like I don't think it's like, oh, that means T1 are favors to win worlds or anything, but I think they high rolled there, and I also think that is kind of applicable to Dplus as well. Because like Showmaker never really felt too comfortable, I feel like, on the AD mids. Like even when everyone else was playing AD mids, he was playing more of the AP mids. He was wanting to play things like the LeBlanc. And like the Storm Surge buff is like fantastic for LeBlanc. It's fantastic for Syndra. Showmaker notoriously a really good Syndra.
These are one of the problems, Hawks, that Dplus is like the most one-dimensional of all the fucking Asian teams. They're just like, they play, they're so obvious who they play through, how they play, what they want to draft, right? I mean, if that isn't the only angle, this is one thing I don't know if you could confirm. People were saying something like maybe they're actually going to play Kellen instead of Moham now. That can't be real, is it? Is that just something nonsense that's all made up? Is that like a real rumor?
I haven't heard it.
Because I hope that's not true.
It was kind of weird, like the change from Kellen to Moham, because we didn't really get any explanation for that, really. And you can understand when a player's like, I know Kellen has issues. Like, I'm not going to sit here and be a Kellen defender, but it was like things were going pretty good, and then they just subbed to Moham, and we got no context at all. And we're like, well, I guess I don't know. Maybe I think it was like champion pool issues, because Kellen seemed like he was kind of limited in what he could play well, and like the draft was suffering, but still, it felt like kind of wild just to sub Moham in when things were generally going okay. But yeah, I feel like Dplus as a team, like Aiming had such a fantastic season, but I also think like Aiming has his picks where he's like insane on, and like if it's like the right meta for him, he is just going to take over games.
He wasn't as good in playoffs, was he? He was just kind of chilling a bit.
Yeah, but I think it's like I've always characterized Aiming as being like if he's on his picks with the dash, picks where he can go aggressive, picks like Zeri, Kai'Sa, Ezreal. Like to me, if he's on those, he's fantastic. But if you stick Aiming in like a Jinx Aphelios meta, I do not think he
was surprisingly good on the Ziggs though. Like that actually was really shocking to me, especially his satchel use was quite unique. Like his Ziggs play is very unique, the way that he was playing it, the way he was trying to like engage with satchel and create picks. I don't see many other players doing that. I thought it was really well done.
Yeah, I've played a lot of Ziggs in the past, and I've been quite vocal about Ziggs. And because one of the things with Ziggs is like it used to be you max W second, because it was like really consistent damage. Because you throw the W, they can't dodge it. Everything else in Ziggs is skill shots. And then they changed it. So now you max E second. So all the pros, you know, when a pick comes to the meta, they just follow what everyone else does. They max E second. But the amount of like bot laners who I would see playing Ziggs, and they launch the satchel at a target and pop it instantly, and not like aiming, like knocking them back, just like, oh, let's do my DPS combo. They throw the satchel, they press W, and then an Aatrox turns up next to them. And they have no safety. Criminal, like some of the play we saw from some of the Ziggs. But I agree. I think Aiming was actually pretty good in it, which was surprising. But I still feel like with how the team has played around him, and like it's kind of been like funnel aiming has been like the MO for such a long time. Yeah. I think he looks so much better when he's on picks that like if you get momentum in a fight, he just takes over. And like the eye he has on picks, like particularly I think Kai'Sa and Zeri, for when to go in is really like just top of the game. So if you have a meta where those picks are viable, which I feel like maybe if we see like the Kate Lux being strong, that could be a problem, but who really knows? Like so many 80 carries have been nerfed, but I think that was something they struggled with in playoffs, because I think they would have much rather been able to just, and to be honest, I'm gonna say it, I don't know why they just didn't. Like I feel like teams are so much like, oh, this is the meta, we have to play this, and sure, like it might be a bit worse, but like this is an issue with, I know this team didn't make Worlds, but BNK Fear X, we saw them have such an upsurge in the regular season when they played like dive comps, and their whole thing was like they had this Zeri, Ari, Vi, like trio. And I was like, oh, this works for them. This suits this team. And then they just stopped playing it. And I'm like, okay, I mean, I know some of these picks have been nerfed, but you look lifeless without that. And I think teams just like, so many try to be like, oh, GenG are doing this. We have to be GenG light. But if you're GenG light, you're not going to beat, well, I guess Hanwha did, and they're GenG light. So I guess that analogy doesn't hold up anymore. But like, generally speaking, like if you just copy the best team, they're going to be better at that strategy than you. You need to approach it with like what style actually works for you. And I think Dplus kind of got lost a little bit, trying to chase the meta instead of doing what worked for them.
Well, I mean, if LeBlanc and Syndra get stronger, though, like, is this a great patch for a Showmaker? Is the next question, because like we saw him, the LeBlanc was kind of his signature pick even when it was fringe meta throughout these playoffs.
Yeah, I think like the Storm Surge buffs, like Luden's Storm Surge is such a strong 2-item spike. Like has 15 pen now, like Sork Shoes and Storm Surge, you have 30 pen. You have like the Luden's proc and the Storm Surge proc. I legit think you have games where like LeBlanc's on 2 items, pops over wall, yet he carries gone. And it's just like, it's not even like you have to, like you normally have to be a bit fed to do that. But like LeBlanc's now have been going like Horizon focus, which just it does nowhere near as much damage as Storm Surge now. And like the trade-off is like you lose a bit of ability haste, which doesn't care about that much, for just flat magic pen. It's like, it's such a good trade-off. So I mean, I've heard, because Syndra got like a buff to her ult damage, but it was really small. But apparently, like in the in-houses and stuff, people have been playing Syndra with Storm Surge. It's been I think LeBlanc's going to come in, and I really hope we see, because I think any tournament where Showmaker has picks that are good for him and he's playing well is a more exciting tournament. Because I think like he's definitely a player who's like mood shifts with like maybe how his team's doing or the meta. When he's having a good time, when he's dialed in, he's just such a pleasure to watch.
There's two things scare me though about Dplus, and they're at the top side of the map. One, their jungler is a rookie. That's already a factor. Like I'm always a bit nervous about that. And then even though I'll give him credit, he did have a glow up this summer. Kinging is still kinging at the end of the day. Like he is going to be going against like Bin, 369, like some fucking Zeus, Keen. These are some Smurf players, mate. Like he's in a tough spot. He better have amazing worlds if they want to do something.
I feel like, Kingen kind of has a similar thing to Thorin, where it's just like, no matter how good they're playing, I'm always a bit like, yeah, but still, still Kingen, still Thorin, There's just moments where it comes out where I'm like, oh man, that's, you're like, wait, maybe things have, no, same
By the
player,
way, the Thorin analogy is so on point, because I always defend Thorin when people say shit, because he isn't. And in fact, last year I thought he was amazing going into Worlds. But the problem is, at the same time, if I built him up and defended him, if at the end you were like, right, it's Thorin against Bin, gun to your head, you die if you picked up. Well, I'm picking Bin all day long, aren't I? There's not even a universe where I'm crafting the Thorin angle. I won't let you hate on him, but I also do agree he's not on the same level. Of course not. Of course not.
I feel like it's what, like even in the finals, like there was that Camille game.
Yes.
I find it, like, to some degree, I find it amazing, just the ability.
He thought he was still on GenG. He was still, what the fuck was that? I know.
Just the ability of this player is to like be rock solid mentally, where like he'll just sprint a game down and just be unfazed. But like there were so many Dora moments, like more so last year, where like he'd be winning and then he'd just get solo killed, and I'm like, why? Where did that come from? I don't know. He's a fun player to watch, and he's definitely. At his best, he's fantastic, but you will simultaneously see his best and worst in a series. And he may win that series, but he's still going to have games where you're like, what are we... I mean, even, what's the big one? Remember, I think last year in spring, when Pays won MVP of the finals, and everyone said it should have been Thorin. And I still get grief from this from some of my co-workers, like Wolf, because I voted Pays, and everyone's like, no, it should have been Thorin. He made the big carry. And you know what my thing was? I just couldn't remember. I just couldn't get out of my mind. He was playing Jace, and he got solo killed by Zeus' Scion. Right. And I'm just like, even when he has a series where everyone's like, this was such a fantastic series, he can't help it. And he just can't help just run it down occasionally. It's like how he's wired.
All right, so final question as we wrap up. So I think we can all agree GenG is probably the top, but I want to hear who you think is number 2 likely. Like, do you think that with these changes, T1 and their clutch factor Worlds, is T1 the second best team, or is it still Hanwha? Because I'm leaning towards T1 myself.
I feel like I mean, I was the big Hanwha believer, and I feel like I'm honestly leaning T1 with this. I think they've been so neutered by lane swaps, and I legitimately believe this is them unlocked. And I think HLE they had a fantastic playoffs, had a fantastic season, but I just don't think the meta is going to favor them. And I think Worlds is so much about like being on the right patch. And I think T1, like, it's not even the narrative thing that they always show up. I think they're a team who, when things are going wrong, they'll like go back and like re-examine and go, okay, like, why are we losing so horrifically? And other than saying, well, Fake is playing badly, they can obviously look at like what works for them. And I have a feeling that if the meta isn't immediately like the hard winning bot 2v2s, they will bring it out at some point and go, oh, this is great. Let's just do this for the rest of the tournament. So I think I'm probably putting T1 second.
Also, I will just put this out there. They are technically Orcs, double reigning world champions.
Is that because
World Cup? They won the World Cup.
Oh, yes, the infamous World Cup.
I didn't name it. Yeah. Everyone would go mad at me if I said it was just an nonsense. That's a World Cup. They won the World Cup and the World Championship. So,
I thought this was something about how like they should have won against DRX.
No. The joke is they should. They should. But here's the problem. In a way, I was annoyed when that happened because I always thought like DRX definitely should have won. But you know what? If everyone's going to talk shit on JDG because T1 beat him, well, you just DRX them, didn't you? So there you go. You're DRX now. You can be DRX now, Faker. There you go. You fuck.
See, the thing is, whoever wins was always the best team. That's how it works.
Yes.
It's called outcome focused assessments. You see the outcome.
That's why it's my favorite narrative, because the same T1 fan saying that at the end of 2023, 1 year earlier was saying the opposite about DRX, wasn't it? It's like when Game 5 ended, they didn't go, well, you know what? At the end of the day, congratulations, DRX, the best team in the world and the best team of 2022. No, like the rest of us, you all just went, wait a minute, how did that happen? What? In fact, the joke is, I've said this joke about other series, but it definitely applies to that series. Bro, if I go back and rewatch DRX T1, I still think T1 are going to win until like about the end of the fucking 5th game or something. Like, I still don't believe it can end out, even though I know what happens. I don't believe it's going to happen.
It's still like the most mind-blowing timeline.
It's insane. I still can't believe it's real, mate.
I think that there's other worlds.
Was so gangster, I can't lie. Bro, they beat EDG, the reigning world champions. Then they beat GenG, the best Korean team. Then they just beat T1 and Faker, the greatest player of all time, in the final. Run. And then not only did they win like all that, which is super legit, but then every time, here's what ruins it for me. I pull up that like roster list and I'm like, no, what the fuck? King and Beryl and Zika, why? Why?
It's just all vibes. It's just all vibes. But I just think you take other worlds and like you're like, oh, if we played this 100 times, like obviously they're not going to win every single time. Maybe this team wins like 20%, but I actually think we got the 1 in 100. I think that was the 1 in 100 outcome. It was such a sick sort of Worlds run, but like I don't know if we're ever going to get something that good again. You
have to understand that was just the universe going, you know what, Deft? We've been pretty rough on you all these years. There you go. There's your gold watch on the way out. Go on.
And that was his last stance.
That was
his final last stance.
Yeah. I'm cool with it for that one reason. At least he got to win Worlds, mate.
Yeah, and he didn't play again after that. He retired, living off the high, and he didn't play on KT and
never did.
Whatever happened.
Why would he continue? Shitty Dplus and then KT. Why would you?
I don't know. I mean, I don't know why you wouldn't just like end on the high, but I guess I can respect him for taking the bag while it's there.
By the way, as a quick aside, before we end, I will ask you one thing, because this is an LCK specific question. The one player I do feel bad for in the LCK is, bro, I was thinking this when I was doing my tier list today of all the players, right? And when I'm going through all the different positions, there's some positions aren't that crazy, Like, it's not like mid lane goes like 7 names deep, like, oh my God, these are great. Like, some of them are just like, whatever. I just look at this Worlds list and I was like, bro, what? I tell you who's had a really fucking hard time the last few years. Fucking BDD, mate. That guy should be at this tournament. He's fucking really good. Like, he's actually really good, guys. It's just he plays on KT roster, sadly. So that means he's allowed to ruin other people's worlds, but not go himself. So there you go.
I feel like that regional final was so heartbreaking. Just like BDD doing everything to go, and his teammates just wanted a vacation. I mean, like it's harsh, but it's true. Like I put him second All Pro for the,
he's mega.
Split.
Yeah,
and really I think like even. I mean, obviously, if Cubby didn't exist, I think he's just the best performing mid laner, and he's so hamstrung by his team to such a ridiculous degree. Yes. It's sad, I hope he gets. I mean, we know obviously that roster's going to change because like Deft's finally he's had his final dance.
His real final one. Yeah.
His real part 2 final episode. But yeah, I hope BDD gets a team with a bit more life, and that'll actually like back him up when he tries to make it a Worlds. And
even though I don't have a take on the video itself, I did think all those comments, because people made the same joke, but it is a banger joke. It's just the obvious one, the low-hanging fruit. You know, when they brought out this Worlds video, but it has all like fucking like, you know, like 3D rendered images of the player. Someone pointed out, it's obviously true, isn't it? Can you imagine how the fucking heart palpitations whoever made that video had during KT-SKT Game 5? Where they spent like millions of dollars for that faker coming out the castle. It's like, imagine if he didn't even make it, bro. Luckily, it happened. Like, for them, I'm glad it did, because that would be like so depressing if you put all that work into that and all.
But not even just like the video producers, like every exec at Riot, all the people who like track the viewership, they're just
sponsors,
like, fighting, and then they all like, oh god. You know, I don't know if you know the stats. So obviously, the finals, the summer finals, we had Honor Life Esports GenG was an absolute banger, 5 games, right? Had 1 million less viewers than Spring when it was the 5 games. T1 against, and like it was actually a really good viewership finals, like in general, but like you just know the draw is so different if T1 and specifically Fake is not there. So I think anyone who's even slightly got skin in the game for in terms of Will's viewership is like, oh, you know, heart's calming down a bit now.
Yes. Anyway, right. Thanks to Orcs for coming on. Obviously, who is it next? Monty? Is it Nymaera next? Dagda, there we go. Right, okay.
Talk about LEC. All right. Well, thank you very much, Ox. Appreciate it.
Thanks for having me. Catch you guys
later. Take a quick break, and we'll be back with our next guest. Surprise! It's me, Monty. Now, you may like being surprised by me, but what is an unpleasant surprise is someone stealing your data on the internet. Now, how might you stop this? Why? I might recommend ExpressVPN to keep all your data nice and encrypted, especially when you're on public Wi-Fi networks. Luckily, they have a lovely app for your phone that can also make sure that your data is encrypted at all times. Sure to use it whenever you're out and about, maybe on some questionable wireless networks. Sure, it might save you some data on your plan, but you don't want to be giving away any of your personal data to someone who might be lurking there. Not only that, but it allows you to access content all over the world. Many of you guys like to follow along with us at Last Free Nation Culture as we watch films on 4Play or on Nerd Legion. And you may not know this, but films have different availabilities in different regions. So what's on Netflix in Korea, where I live currently, versus the United States might be totally different. Now, you're already paying for these services, so maybe consider getting a VPN like ExpressVPN so you can access it if you're already paying and get that high quality that you get from the streaming services. So, that said, be smart. Stop paying full price for streaming services and only getting access to a fraction of their content. Get your money's worth at expressvpn.com/summoning. Don't forget to use our link at expressvpn.com/summoning to get an extra 3 months of ExpressVPN for free. On to the next guest.
Right, we're back for our next segment where we are joined by Dagda, who obviously used to do the LPL, but now he's an LEC caster. Although I do notice that living in that weird quantum superstate does work whenever these announcements come out. Because then if someone goes, what about the LPL guys? They go, hey, they've got Hysterics and Dagda. It's like, but they're actually LEC people now. So there's a bit of both. I would actually ask that question. How do you actually try to watch all the LPL nowadays? Are you still trying to live on that grind? Is that your main second league at this point still?
Oh, big time, Like I even on the back of my phone. Like I'm still just a massive LPL fan in general. So it's definitely hard on like Wednesdays we have story meetings all day, and like Saturdays and Sundays if I'm in the show, it can be hard to catch like the last end of stuff. But I watch a good chunk of it.
Well, it's also a good time zone for Europe anyway. You kind of just like wake up and chill and watch it, right?
Yeah. And that's kind of how I start most of my days, but
Plus, that way, you also get like a good reference point. Like you can watch the LPL and then come back to the LEC and go, oh, right, so that's how you misplay all these champions in jungle and top.
That's how you play Ziggs,
Exactly. Because I do feel like, bro, like even though everyone loves it's usually the junglers I notice people like to bag on, because obviously we've never really had, except now we do, by the way. We have like the Razork Nidalee now. We have some of those picks finally. But the one that has never, ever made it through, Dagda, to the West is If anyone's watched LPL since about 2018 onwards, that region just runs the carry top lane. Like the Jace, the Camille, these are the Fiora. These were like the greatest carry. I might have seen like one game ever like that in the LEC bit. Like it's not a they don't try to play through the top lane like that, right? It's even when people play the carries, they don't really do it like with the whole team like that. It feels like still.
No, it's just the caliber of play that you have to be able to do that just isn't really in Europe. And like you can see guys like Broken Blade putting in a ton of work. Like he could probably as a coach to try and get there. But to give him his due at MSI, he was able to match up in a lot of lane states and actually look quite well. But it is just a different ball game. The second you see Bin pick up Camille and he's like doing that whole combo over the wall, or he just understands exactly how much damage he can get and how to trade more effectively, you just never really get that. So I don't even think it's so much like, well, one, it is the team being able to play around them, but more so it's just the understanding of these champions is just so different over there, and you have to have such good hands to be able to pick them up.
Speaking of understanding of champions, I have questions for you, Dagda. Why in LEC playoffs was like nobody playing Rumble or Ziggs? Are these the forbidden champions of Europe when in every other region, including LCS, by the way, we're seeing these picks be mega picks? But I just kept sitting there doing my VOD reviews of LEC playoffs or season, whatever you guys call it, your second finals of the summer, thinking to myself, why is no one picking Rumble? It's first pick, 100% ban worthy in other major regions, yet nobody in Europe wants to play this champion.
Yeah, the Rumble did not understand the slightest. Like Rumble was just so insanely strong. You got a ton of pressure with it. It did feel to me though, like a lot of teams didn't understand how to set up objectives properly for a Rumble. So there's a lot of times where they just kind of fumbled their way into an objective fight, but they wouldn't try and play for a choke point, or they'd give so much room on these chokes that the Rumble wouldn't get the full value. Whereas when you look across at LPL and LCK, they are so much smarter about where they pick a fight on the map. Like even when you watch teams like Top Esports, they're really good at finding like a Maokai ultimate on a choke point that just then you unleash the Rumble ult and it's just game over. Like you never get to take a step towards Dragon. And I think it's the poor lack of objective control means that we don't play as well around a lot of these points. And then Ziggs, I have no idea. We saw it like once or twice, and it frustrated me how there was a lot of stuff when I did see Ziggs in Europe. They didn't play the lane phase particularly well because there was so much threat that you can have. Like if you watch Gala play Ziggs, like he'll knock you back level 4. There's Nautilus beside him. They bonk you and you're basically pushed out of the lane. Like there's so much threat at all points in time. But when you watch the few times you saw it in LEC, it was very passive. It'd get poked out of lane. You have to burn a TP early, so you couldn't even threaten like early void grubs. You just lose so much of that threat, let alone the mechanics then of a team fight, which Ox already gave it to think about in the last section. So I'll leave it to the expert. But yeah, I definitely think there was just a lot of understanding on how to play maps for these picks just didn't really slot into LEC. So an awful lot of the times it just wasn't worth it because, well, we can just take something else that's just going to be easier to execute regardless of a point on the map.
By the way, I do think that needs to be the major criticism of LEC as a region. Is, as you said, the objective control's non-existent. Like the joke would be, Dagda, after G2, the other good team is BDS and they're not even here. Like Fnatic and Mad Lions are not teams that are going to excel against the LPL and the LCK teams in this regard. Like, so that's a real concern I have. Like obviously with Fnatic, even like, look, I think Razork's actually, when I did my tier list, I'm hella biased. I think Inspired and Razork are both better than a whole bunch of Asian ones. Way big. Anyone with fucking name way, get the fuck out the way. These guys are better than you. They just don't have the 6 solo laners, that's all. But I tell you what, as much as Razork's a demon, mate, he's not the player I expect to like control the map and set up for the, they've got like a very fly by the seat of the pants playing style. So do you have concerns about the stylistic aspects of Europe? Because I feel like people aren't really trashing the players when they say LEC sucks. I think it's more they don't see the style of play you see from LCK or LPL and they just look at LEC and they don't know what they're doing,
Yeah, I think the biggest problem for LEC is that there's a lack of forethought for the next 3-minute block. Like even when you heard the Giant X coach about it, it was like, hey, we're working on a minute window. But it's when you look at LPL and LCK, it's much further. So, and it's the willingness to pull a TP trigger. Like they will TP to a lane to get that wave pushing in their favor to then be in position for an objective fight. They're already considering that mega far ahead. But we just don't really get that in LEC. It feels like oftentimes it's like, oh, I am now in the top lane, I now need to teleport to Dragon versus even the opposite way around. I think 369 is excellent at this, where 369 will set up a wave very slowly, and then just sneak off onto the map for like 10, 20 seconds, see if he can find something, and then go back to his lane. But he's constantly thinking of, what's my wave state? How can I get onto the map? How can I try and do things? And I think that's where we start to fall apart, where it's kind of like, we are a minute and a half, 50 seconds from Dragon. Oh, I know I should reset, and now I should look for vision control, but it's not a pre-planned thought, or even like thinking about the composition as to how we can best effectively, do we fight at river choke? Do we want to let the enemy take space in the dragon pit and then fight them in the pit when they're grouped up? It just feels like there's a lack of forethought in a lot of situations as to how you want to approach these moments.
Well, it's also, I mean, Fnatic was obviously like infamously bad in these playoffs for their macro game and like their, their objective prioritization. But also, I mean, just a lack of forethought, particularly from Fnatic. If you go back to the first game they played against G2, Oscarnen's like ahead on this Kennen, right? And they don't think to themselves, well, we actually do need Flash on this Kennen. He doesn't have Rocket Belt. And they're using Flash or TPs to like kill caps in a side lane 2 minutes before Dragon spawns. And they're not thinking, okay, so we can stop caps in the side lane, but we have to actually have summoners up, because if we don't, then we actually can't fight the next Drake, right? It does seem very limited in scope when it comes to particularly Fnatic. They just can't make decisions. And what's so pathetic about Fnatic is that they'll be in winning game states and they could make any decision, just make a decision, and you probably win this game, but they just stand mid and just stare at you.
Or Jun just sends it and they're dead. There is like no in between. And I think it is a lack of deciding how you want to try and play the game. Because I've kind of seen Fnatic change over the course of summer and season finals. For the start of summer, it was like, hey, we got the Talia and the Hui, but we're going to hyper focus on Humanoid is going to be the carry. Like Noah is just going to stay boss. Even for Void Grubs, and when everyone was fighting for the 6 Void Grub buff, Noah just stays bot. We do not care. We want to force a 4v4, so Noah's not involved. And then we'll move on and we'll try and play off of that, where we're just playing towards Humanoid in the side lane. We'll try and set up for some fights. But the whole thing is using Void Grubs to bulk up Humanoid and then make him the big carry. And then as we started to get later into the split and teams started to focus more dragons, Noah then became a bit more involved in the play. But the problem was, we saw multiple times that, look, Noah, we can say stuff about his team fights, but at the same time, Fnatic really never set him up for success in these fights either. No. Like we never, so it's like both sides are just as bad. And I think that's where they cannot play through Noah. And I think that's the biggest problem for Fnatic, is that like they kind of get stuck with one playstyle. And then when you need to rely on, hey, Jun finding an engage to set up Noah, or to set up a team fight with a strong front line for Noah, they're just not able to do it.
Sure.
So I want to talk about G2 a little bit, because obviously, like, they came out top 4 at MSI. They looked really good. They legit looked like a top 4 team in the world.
And could have been third, obviously. They could have beat T1.
Yeah, they could have beat T1. So they were looking very strong after Spring Split. Then they come in, stumble a little bit in summer, like definitely have a lot more difficulties kind of making a good run into Worlds. Do you think this is like fatigue or meta dependency? Because it didn't seem like they were capable of playing a lot of the good meta picks, particularly around Caps when he's not on the Tristana. Yike has had some very, I would say, strange pickups throughout the playoffs. Is Jungle Gwen really better than Brand in a lot of the compositions that they're running? My answer is no, but then he plays Brand and misses all his skill shots. Is Hansama, who doesn't play Zeri, very good a lot of these times? Like they kind of got the runaround from Mad Lions, who is just flipping the Ezreal, Zeri, and Corki into all the different lanes. And it felt like G2 was not willing to select these champions because they don't have the same versatility. What's your read on G2? Because it was rougher than normal, I would say, for them, especially considering how good they were at MSI.
Well, I mean, I think BB on your lad's show, I think it was Paraspike with Dom and Nymaera, talked a lot about it. It was a really, really good show.
Sackdown.
Sackdown, yeah. And it was great. He just went into, look, hey, it's not really clicking. Like they had to stop scrims to just be like, look, we just need to hang out and like remember what it's like to actually just enjoy each other's company and just be friends. So I think there's definitely a lot that's going on behind the scenes. And I think that then started to spill over into the game as well, because there was a lot of trying to figure out how they wanted to approach the game, whether that was, hey, we want to try and go for like some kind of mage mid, because we saw the same from BLG a little bit, where like Knight coming back after MSI was like, I'm going to play Annie, I'm going to play Ari. So I think it was kind of interesting to see that they had a similar-ish read. But it definitely didn't work. And then we started to see the Gwen, which felt like another try. Hey, let's see if this goes well. But like Yike could still, like Yike's brand was great. So it was kind of weird to me that they tried so hard to horseshoe in a lot of these issues or these strange picks, which just caused issues. But I think partly it was one, a bad meta read. And then secondly, I do think there was stuff going on behind the scenes where Yike was just not gelling with the picks he had, with how he wanted to play, with how he wanted to try and play around mid lane. Even the engages he had when he was on the Gwen, like there's that one in mid lane against MDK where he just ghosts in his Gwen, gets completely destroyed by Alvaro's Alistair, and it just all falls apart. So I think there was a lot of clear issues. The big question to me is, as I say, have they solved them? I won't know until we hit main stage, but I think this is definitely a team that has shown in the past that they are able to get people around them that will support them, get them through a lot of these issues. And as you say, coming into MSI, a lot of the same problems were levied at them. Like their early game sucked. They have a mid game, but they can't really get anything together. And then we saw them at MSI and they popped off, right? So I don't think it's something that they haven't dealt with before. I think it'll just be a case of, is it as easy for G2 to find a pick like Poppy that kind of warps the draft around G2 so much,
or the
that it makes
Lissandra
it
also,
yeah,
right? I mean, that has been like, if we think about G2's strength internationally, like the Poppy, the support Lissandra into Rakan. Sure, the Gwen doesn't work, and like we can all point that out, but it doesn't mean it can't. Like, I don't think Gwen jungle is inherently a terrible choice. Like, there's probably scenarios where it makes a lot of sense, just not where they were picking it in the playoffs, for LEC. But that is, if we look at G2 strengths, it's like versatility, creative shot calling on the fly, ability to play from behind, in probably the best level 1 team in the world from the past few years. Like, they have the best set plays, weird picks that really warp the meta around them for strange bans, which then in turn give them power picks, right? And if you don't ban the weird pocket champion, then it just completely like messes with your draft, and messes with your gameplay because they're the only ones using it. So G2's strengths, I don't think have gone away heading into Worlds. And so I don't necessarily buy that this team isn't going to have a very strong Worlds performance.
Yeah, I agree. And I think to give them the work they put in over the last 2 years is really starting to come to fruition, because it has been like, hey, we're bringing in lads like Duffman to make sure we've got a mid game that's strong, that we can actually figure out how to play. Like, I don't go into Worlds thinking, oh, Jesus, one of the lads isn't going to hold up in lane phase. You're just like, hey, look, they're going to be...
Also, shout out to that story where Broken Blade even said that actually Alfari literally helped him with his laning. And by the way, you did see an improvement in his laning, I thought, after that.
Yeah, big time. Like, I think he's shout him out on the broadcast about like so often BB is just like Alfari's giving him so much help, but you can see the difference, right? And I think that's where previous iterations I'd be like, can we fully hold up to like Elkin on, or like, if T1's bot lane suddenly pops off, like, are we just going to fall apart? Like, I still think there is maybe a little bit for bot lane, but like nowhere near the same extent. And also, like, I think the shift back over towards like Syndra and stuff being in the meta for caps is going to be super nice. I think there is definitely a shift towards champions that are going to be great for this team. And especially when there is such a massive change coming in.
Is it true when you said that earlier on the last segment, Monty? Was it an example where you were saying like ADC is going to be more like Jinx or Phelios? Is that what the actual patch is going to be?
So Ox mentioned that.
Or was he meaning that as a hypothetical if it happened? Did he mean that this patch is going to be more like those champions?
Well, I think a lot of the meta is going to change just because, especially with the Ziggs nerfs coming in, like I do think like you're gonna see a pretty big shift. And Ox also was saying like, oh, he thinks, Caitlyn Lux or these very like lane dominant champions are going to take hold.
That should be perfect for Summer. By the way, first of all, Jinx and Phelios are the champions he wants to play. And then secondly, I can tell you from all the interviews I've done with people who've played with Hans Sama, they say he's like obsessed with lane, basically. He's the guy who just wants to win lane really hard, basically. So I think actually he also clearly didn't really love the Zeri meta, mate. That wasn't his shit, was it? Like, he wasn't the guy who was like, give me that, like all those LCK players. So I feel like because that's the other thing. I feel like it's really easy to pick holes in Yike, especially this last split, and obviously Broken Bladed typically, because people think they want him to be a carry top laner. He doesn't get to do that all the time in this team. But if you think about the strength of G2, it's almost always when the bot lane's really good. When Hansama's really percolating, when Mickey can get his picks, that's the team that really could have been third at MSI. Like, for real, could have like clapped T1 twice. Like, that's the team you want to see. Because actually, you know what? If you look at those players mechanically, Hansama and Mickey X can play with those Asian players we're talking about, Dagda. They're not getting completely dwarfed like some of these other guys out there.
Yeah, 100% agree. And also, like, to give Mickey his due, it's not only just his lane phase. Like, this guy is a menace on the map. He's so good at finding these timing windows that he can play around. Yeah, and like, rivaling, if not better, than a lot of the supports that are coming in from the eastern regions as well. And I think a lot of guys have him rated super highly as well, if you look at like, the tier list for players that are floating around. So I think it is going to be a case of like not only just dictating the pace of a lane phase, being able to get caps ahead or play off of like a Syndra stun from caps into maybe there's a Viego or a Lee Sin or whatever. I don't know if it's Jarvan or what the meta is going to be jungle wise, but if that is the plan, suddenly you can get very far ahead very quickly. So and then you've just got your late game insurance in a Jinx. And I know, like, looking at the top few picks in solo queue, it's like the Jins, the Kai'Sas, the Ezreals, but I mean, you're fine with that as Hansama. So I think you're going to be totally fine. And then in that regard, Viego has kind of been more towards what Yike has wanted to play coming in. Like, he was a Kha'Zix one trick when he started. So kind of going back to his bread and butter as well, where he's not trying to figure out what the hell he wants to play. He's just got his three basics. Like, I think it's going to be great. I think it's just going to be so much easier for them to operate.
By the way, we forgot about that too, Monty. That's another thing on the Orc segment. There's another factor. If Viego comes back, that is going to be right in Orna's fucking wheelhouse immediately again, mate. He'll be loving that. Yeah, absolutely. I also think to myself, that's going to be a Razork fucking mega pick right there as well, hopefully.
Yeah. It's funny looking at the teams. Like, every single time I'm like thinking of the meta, I'm like, this just is great for almost every mid jungle that's going to the tournament. Like, I want to see what Kanye can do on Viego, Lee Sin, what Tien can do, what Razork can do, what like, and then mid lane is like, oh, if we get like Silas starting to creep back in, I mean, that's insane for Knight, for Showmaker, for a bunch of these players. So it's just, I think this is just going to be such a cool Worlds meta.
Yeah.
That and so much playmaking potential that it's going to kind of force a lot of like Caps to step up, Humanoid to step up, if we are going to see LEC actually try and contest with these lads.
Do you think people have overblown that aspect? Because I think what people are missing is the last few Worlds actually have had quite a lot of options as to what you could do. You didn't have to just go the obvious angle. So when people say they're buffing Orianna and Desir in the meta, they think that means that you can only play those two champions. So Faker's like, brilliant, it's my world to get. That's like, you can still play all this other shit too. Like, you don't have to only pick that, guys.
Yeah, I mean, like, if it is Orianna has counters, right? And like, you're going to end up just going down the tier list. And I'm sure we'll start off with a Syndra and an Orianna, and then suddenly this pick comes out because that's strong into this, which is then right. It's strong into Rise. Yeah. It's only like, hey, these champions happen to be strong, but it's only a matter of time until people start to break that and find the things. And I mean, it's the reason Team 1 are champions, right? Is we had a meta and they just broke the whole thing with the double AD carry bot. So it's only a matter of time until someone brings it out. But I think that is the joy of Worlds as well, is seeing teams that can break that. And usually it is a team like G2. So we're just hoping it's them again.
I mean, I think it's also interesting, at least at this Worlds, that we're not going to have, any of the Asian, like the Chinese or Korean teams in play-ins, right?
Oh, true.
And so, I wonder how much insight into the meta we're actually going to get into from play-ins, basically, because, this isn't an example of, especially because when it's hosted in Europe or in North America, the Asian teams just stay in Asia until the last possible second. So a lot of the scrims are happening or have happened, because play-ins about to start, in China or Korea. So because nobody who is going to be playing in play-ins has been exposed to that meta, and it is like a disease, right, that gets transmitted. So even if none of the play-ins teams were actually scrimming against any of the LPL or LCK teams, by this point in time, they would have been like in contact through teams that they were scrimming. And so it would kind of rub off on them. And this is why, in my opinion, like the Worlds in Europe and North America are always weird, because the Asian teams just don't leave. So unless it's in North America and teams go to Korea to scrim and then come back to North America, but there wasn't time because this Worlds is so early, there's such a short window between the end of LCS and LEC and Worlds that there wasn't time for like the double jet lag adjustment, right? So teams just went to Europe. And sometimes Europe does figure out great metas that can, surprise Eastern teams. But more often, it's that the Asian teams just show up with, because they're better teams, a much more powerful version of the meta. So play-ins, this is one of those instances, is what I'm trying to say. The play-ins might look nothing like the actual Swiss stage.
Yeah, and it wouldn't be the first time. Even when Worlds was in the US in 2022, we had that Amumu support pick that was everywhere in play-ins and then just completely disappeared throughout the main tournament. So yeah, it's definitely there. So I think it'd be interesting to see, but I know for teams like G2, they regularly do get scrims against the top teams. So I'm curious if it's a case of, hey, we're gonna sneak a little slip across the Fnatic to be hey, here's what you should be practicing, but you never know, right? But I think there's definitely going to be.
Also, I feel like that's culturally where the divide appears, Dagda. I could believe the LCK teams might slip that note under the door, is the picks too much. I feel like in Europe, we just want the other team to lose, though. We want them to get shown up by T1. You know what I mean? That's kind of how I feel like.
I mean, maybe you're right. So, but yeah, I think it's just trying to figure out. Because even Ox was talking about, right? The Caitlyn looks and things like this. There is always going to be something that comes in that you're not really seeing a huge amount of, and then suddenly it just comes out of the blue. So, and especially as I say, you're moving away from so many different things. It feels like trying to figure out, even down to, is it a Viego Lee Sin, or do we go for Jarvan, or do we go for Silas mid, or do we how far down the iterations have we gone? If it is just Orianna and Syndra, to does TF suddenly start to come out? Is Ryze already been talked about as mega strong? The meta that we have is going to be entirely different from what these lads are coming across with. Even for guys like Nice, who's a big Annie player, it's you just don't know. And I agree with you. I'd be very surprised if the meta that we have over the next 5 days of play-ins is the same as what we actually come into main stage with.
On the topic of meta and reading the meta, what can you expect and what will the Asians think of us in the West? So the team, obviously, we should talk about now is Mad Lions, because one, I still can't even believe they're here. But to be fair, if you beat G2 in the best of 5, you probably should be there. But even so, it's so it's one of those teams. Look, it used to be BDS with Adam. I always just want to be the fly on the wall when the Asian top team plays these people first. That's for real. He's actually doing that. I want to know, is Merwin really just going to have a fucking randomizer for his draft picks? What are we going to do with this? What are your expectations for Mad Lions? Where's your head up with this team, Dagda?
I mean, there's definitely going to be the randomizer. There has to be by default. There is no way that it's not going to be.
It's almost the job of the team, right?
Yeah, exactly. But it's as harsh as it sounds. I just don't have any faith in them to really get there. I want to. They're a fun team. They're a bunch of rookies, and I want them to be able to have a great experience and stuff like that. But I do think it's kind of just going to be a reality check where you come in and you're well, you're playing against the top teams. The fact that G2 were so often able to sneak a ward in behind you when you got these leads to absolutely destroy you is only going to get 10 times worse. They're not going to make the same early mistakes a lot of the times that G2 was in those finals as well. So it just feels like they're going to get blasted out of the ward. If you put them up against a team like LNG that are crazy slow and just slowly playing off of these timing windows that they find, it's you're just done for. So I think, but I don't necessarily think that's a bad thing for MDK either. I think they kind of need to get shown the ropes of what actually this could look like. And that's where you'll be able to bounce back. But from Mirwan's perspective, I think his best bet is to still try and go for these crazy picks, because I think the resounding thing I've heard from a lot of people is Mirwan's just not great on a huge amount of the meta picks. He's good, but he's just not up to the standard that you really need to be able to control it. So if he goes up against guys like Bane, 369, Zeus, they're just going to destroy him. So I think go for something that's a bit more off meta, try and throw a wrench in the works and just see if you can hold on. But I don't know how well they're going to do once they start to come into, even guys like Team Liquid. I think Team Liquid's going to be a stress for them too, let alone if they come up against any of the LPL or LCK teams.
Do you buy that MDK is going to make it into Swiss?
I think so. I think them 100 Thieves and PSG Talon, I'm kind of yes. And then it's just a case of who else follows. I don't think teams are clean enough or even fully understand how to punish MDK in a lot of ways, because MDK still have a very good early game. Like Elyoya does do a good job of keeping control, and
yeah,
they are
and they
able to
always,
find these leads.
you know, what I really liked about the difference between Mad Lions and playoffs versus what we had seen from them throughout most of the season was this roster started with just playing around Elyoya 24/7. It's like nobody does anything unless Elyoya is there, right? He's the tip of the spear. He's the one going in, and everybody else just plays very passively. When Elyoya's there, that's where the play is being made. There is no like cross mapping from Elyoya. There's nobody like all-inning in lane if Elyoya is not there. It's like it must happen around Elyoya. And that's where they found success. When they moved away from that is when they started to really hurt. And I noticed in playoffs, it was that way again. It was like, if Elyoya is there, Elyoya is calling the play. We are playing for Elyoya and around him. Like he is calling the dive. We're going to be there, right? And that is going to be very effective, I think, at play-ins against worse teams because they have a very distinct identity, and they're really quite good at using that identity when they decide to abide by it.
Yeah, 100%. And I think the punishments that were made against them by teams like Fnatic and G2 and all that aren't going to be seen in play-ins. Like you're not going to have teams that are preemptively putting TP wards in behind you, or teams that are effectively pushing out wave states, so you end up in awkward positions and stuff. It's and even from the challenge I feel like they're going to have in the early stages just isn't going to be there as much. And that's why I think like teams like PSG Talon would be the ones that would actually contest them, or because I think PSG play a very solid macro game. Like they play out through side lanes well. But apart from that, I just don't see like GAM or Vikings really like getting up there. Like GAM has some better macro than Vikings, but I don't really see them doing a huge amount. Maybe Hawks on like a weird off day for MDK could take them just because they do love these like flank TP ward plays and stuff, but there's just no real team that I look at and go, oh yeah, this is the team that stylistically beats Mad or can contest them in a lot of ways.
All right, here's the obvious question, which is, I do feel like the question is just centered around caps, but it's how far can G2 go? Because I will say, even though it maybe like simmered a little bit towards the end of the season finals, aside from that, if people don't know, this actually was one of the best caps years ever. It might even be contended for his best. Yeah, especially the earlier you go, he was fucking smurfing those first few splits bros. Like, I used to think some of the series they won back then, they definitely could have got cracked by a couple of teams, but he used to just pull it out the fire every time. Like, it was unbelievable. So you do have to look, and look, we can debate on all the G2 players where the floor is, but the ceiling for caps is fucking massive. Like, again, when I was doing a tier list pro, I'm not even trying to be biased. People don't know I was more of a perks guy. But I tell you what, if you actually look at mid laners, if you look at some of the mid laners coming out the LPL and LCK, they're not that crazy. It is people like fucking people who historically have been maligned, like Zeka. It's people like Zhao, who's kind of long in the tooth. Like, caps actually can be for real. I think like a fourth or fifth best mid laner. Like, he looks pretty good heading into this one.
Yeah, especially because like Shahu's kind of getting towards the end of his career, and you just
Faker hasn't been great.
Yeah, exactly. There was a lot of people below him, mate.
Yeah, I do think it's funny. I think the shift back over towards control mages probably brings Faker up, but puts Shahu further down because I think he was a bit of a Lucian merchant for a lot of the split.
He's playing a bit of the Zeri too as well, yeah.
Yeah, true. Exactly, yeah. But it was like he kind of had these few picks that he could do, but his performance at the start wasn't great of the split. But I think for caps, I think you kind of hit on it there, Thorin. It's like the flexibility, but the versatility that he has is insane, where he kind of figures out exactly what his role needs to be in this meta, and it's just excels at it. So like oftentimes
it's another thing to say, right? He's not actually just being played around like a perma carry. Like sometimes he actually completes the draft clearly, doesn't he?
Yeah. And I think that's what makes him so terrifying is that it's like not only the fact of, hey, we can give him the Silas and he's going to pop off and he's going to have this insane mechanical outplay that you're just going to be like, wow, what a player. But it's also hey, I know that my job right now, the best way for me to win the game is I'm going to go sit in this side lane for the next 10 minutes. I'm going to farm up on Azir. I'm going to farm up on this Smolder, and I'm going to come back and I'm going to win the game. It's not going to look flashy. It's going to be a very slow burn. It's going to be a bit of a boring game, but that's what I need to do and I'm going to win the game. So I think it's kind of his understanding of what is needed from him as a mid laner and mid lane role at any given time is really, really good. And even when they're swapping over to like an Ari, or they brought it the Annie earlier on, you could still see a very clear understanding of what is needed from him when he plays this different style or this different role. And I think that's where Caps is just so strong. Whereas when you look at players like, say, Zeka, right? His Yone has been absolutely fantastic. He's had a great split. Like, I'm not going to take away from him.
Oh, yes, mega.
On a bloody mission. But it is a case of, hey, you kind of look and you go, oh, I understand what Zeka does as a player. Like, this is what he fits into this bubble. Whereas when I look at a player like Caps, I can see so much more of how he kind of shifts into these different roles, if he needs to be supportive, if he needs to be the carry, if he needs to play some other style.
Well, also, I mean, at least as far as Caps goes, like we talked about the Syndra always being one of his good champions. LeBlanc is also very strong right now. Silas also very strong right now. So I mean, these are picks that definitely trend towards Caps. I mean, on the focus of Zeka as well, like Yone is still going to be probably the top mid lane champion, but Silas and Akali and Ari are also going to be probably pretty viable at this tournament. So, you know, Zeka might have a bit of a field day at this one. But I think Caps, that, you know, as far as Caps' pool goes, it feels like this is going to be a champion pool that's much more comfortable for him. Like, obviously, he was a great Tristana player. Was he a great Corki player, really? Probably not.
He's definitely on the level of the LPL and the LCK mids. They were cracked on that champion. Yeah.
But that's what I mean, right? And like, that wasn't a dig at Zeka. Like, I do think, but I think he's phenomenal. And I do think the meta is still going to sit him. But I think it's the same for every mid laner. Like, when I look at Knight, I think, you know, the Silas, he's an insane Syndra. He's great in Ari. He's a Kali, who's nuts. Like, he can play all these champions that we're starting to slot into. Caps is the same. Like, Zek is the same. There's so many different champions. Even for Xiaohu, a little bit, like the Syndra is still very good, but some of the other ones are a bit missed. But there's still champions there that I'm like, oh yeah, this is hitting for so many of these players as we start to move in, that it's just going to be fire. Like, I'm just so excited to see all these guys play off.
Obviously, when we have Nymaera, we'll talk more in depth about the LPL, but we should get some of your takes, because actually I'm quite interested in some of the teams coming out. Like, first things first, as it stands right now, is BLG going to win Worlds, Dagda? Is it Knight's time? Is it Bin's time?
I want to say yes. Like, every part of me wants to say yes.
It's a pretty cracked team. It's kind of like an all-star team. It is. Pretty fucking good, isn't it?
But it's also like, you can clearly look at this team and there are cracks as well, right? Like, it's not like I look at this team and they're completely indomitable. And you just see super clean play at every point in time. Like, I think if you look at third game of finals, that Bard was suspect, right? Like,
they won that game though.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, which I don't know how, but yeah, I think there is still a huge amount of games or moments where I look at BLG, I'm like, why? What are we doing here?
Well, so, they also, like, were notoriously, you know, despite their record, if you look at purely wins and losses from best of threes, but if you look at game scores, they were pretty ropey. Yeah. Like, they went to game 3 a lot.
Yeah, and game 1 was always kind of the ropey one, but I think I do think though, when the meta starts to shift in towards what we're seeing, I think they're going to look substantially better, because I think Knight is a fiend on things like the Silas. The Syndra, he made his name on, like, you think back to 2020 game 5 against JDG and he just snipes through the wall. Like, he's had so many moments. There's the base defense that he had in 2021 on Silas. There's all these different moments. The Knight has just been insane.
The double stopwatch one. Yeah, before they had removed. But it's me, he's so good he got that removed from the game. After the right saw that, they went, better take this shot. I will be doing it. So true though.
Yeah, it is. And it's just, I love seeing the guy when he actually has these moments. Because, like, let's be real, I don't think Knight Corky, right? Like, yes, he looked very good, but I don't want to see this player on something like an AD carry pool. I want to see him on these other picks. So I think that's going to help out a lot. And then even, I think a lot of people forget for Wei, 2022, he was like the Viego guy. He just picked it over and over. Him and Tien were the two that just picked it over and over again. I think he had like 36 Viego games, and his next most played was 19 or something like that. Like, the guy just only picked this. So it also is going back towards what's a lot of comfort for Wei in a lot of these situations. So I definitely think BLG are still major contenders. And like, I'm still partway through my prep for GenG, so I can't say 100% that like GenG are better, because I haven't had the chance to fully go through it. But I don't think it's as clear cut, or even for Hanwha either. But I'm also happy to sit in that spot, because I know a lot of people were kind of sad that GenG lost the finals, and like, I can understand. But for me, I was like, finally, I can actually talk about 3 teams from these regions objectively. Yes. There is no golden road. There is no like hype around a team. It's just like, hey, we can actually objectively talk about these teams and take all that bullshit away. So like, I'm actually very happy to see where we're sitting with these teams, because at least it feels like every one of them has a fault, and it can be exploited. And that is a way better place to sit, where we can actually discuss them than anything else.
No, I know what you mean. Like, as much as it would have been, here's the problem with any Golden Road narrative. It only works if at the end of the movie is the happy ending and you get the Golden Road. If you don't, it just becomes like the JDG thing last year, where it becomes a shadow over every other narrative, and it becomes basically the only narrative. And if it dies, because you haven't set your time up for the other narratives, in a way, we're actually lucky it was the old narrative of Fake as the King and he wins worlds that one. Like, if that had actually been like fucking BLG won worlds or something, like with the last roster last year, no one would have been prepared for it. We'd have spent the whole year not talking about it. Would have kind of ruined the world's win, even though they were, by the way, a very good team for the whole year. So, no, I know what you mean. If you look at the actual favourites now, like each have their own strengths. It's like a top trump scenario. It just depends what angle you want it to be, right? That's why the meta angle actually in some ways also makes it super spicy, right? We can't take any of the teams from summer and just one-to-one put them in worlds. Like, we're having to do this like game of how will this player match up? Who will this guy get his champion pool nerfed? Actually, by the way, it's an analyst stream. This is actually what you want for worlds. I also feel like if anyone out there hasn't done it yet, there are so many angles for predictions where you're not going to look like an idiot because no one bloody knows on half of these ones. You could do a lot of crazy predictions.
Yeah, and that's like I think for me, looking at the meta shift and how it's going through, I do want to say it is BLG for me, because I think looking at MSI, Knight struggled against Chovy. Like, we're not going to sugarcoat it. Like,
he did,
but it also was not where Knight wanted to be, right? Like, he doesn't like his ear. He doesn't want to play these champions. So I think coming into this, it's going to be a much better time for Knight in the mid lane. And then it just comes down to a question of like, what happens for Elkanon? Because they got destroyed by Team.
They weren't as good for sure. Remember, they were supposed to be like the best in the world before. By the way, I've got a quick question for you. I don't know if you know this from interviews, but one thing I always thought was weird, because when me and the other people who are the Knight fans on my Discord all just stand Knight, we always used to just put all the blame onto his old coach Crescent from Top Esports. But he hasn't been in the team for years now, Dagda. So the problem is it can't be Crescent anymore, right? Yeah. But one of the things I find weird, here's my problem that I have about Knight. It goes like this. It's not that he's not good on picks like Azir. It's that whenever those picks are in the meta, it's like he never got the memo. He seems to always opt into them, though. Do you know what I mean, bro? Like, he's exactly the person I'd want to do, like, whatever the third counter is, just play that and be the best on it. But he always goes into the picks that they don't, and especially, by the way, at the Worlds, like, he'll go into the Orianna and the Azir, all the ones that we know classically, they're not the ones you want in the LPL. Do you get the sense, does he pick them? Does he want to play them? What do you think it is?
I think it's definitely part of it. Like, at least, I don't know if it's much from interviews or where I have this feeling about Knight, but it's like, I feel like he nearly wants to show he's better than you at everything, where it's almost this like, because my favorite clip that we used to have of him from the LPL was this, he tells us the mic check, that's what I was looking for. Goes to kill the enemy mid laner, and he stops and tells his whole team to look at mid lane. Like, screw whatever the hell else has gone on the map. He goes, look mid, look mid, look mid. He outplays the player, kills him under his own tower, walks away. Is like, I'm so good. So this is on the mic check.
LPL game. That's ridiculous.
I love this. Yeah, I was like, this is sick. So I was like, so that to me summed up Knight, where he's like, I'm going to show I'm better than you, and I'm going to have this like childlike wonder about it. So I do think it's also a case of like, rising to the challenge to go, oh, you're the best Azir in the world, I'm going to beat you with Azir. Yeah. And I do think there is a certain amount of that with Knight. And I don't know if it started with like Yagao back in the day, where like Yagao beat him onto the first team that they played with. Sure. So then he just had to come back and become the best mid laner in the LPL. But yeah, I definitely think there's a bit of kind of, I want to take you on at your own game. But and I think that's why, like, there's so many champions when you think of Knight that he's associated with. Because there's the Zoe, which used to be the Gale pick, then now is the Knight pick. Then there's the Sylas, the Syndras, the Aries. Like, he just has.
Wasn't his LeBron pretty fanging back in the day? LeBron pretty fire too. Yeah.
Yeah, mid-season Cup 2020, he ended up picking up MVP in that. Like, there is so much for this guy that he just pops off on it. But I do think it is a case of like, and even like the one thing I want to potentially see is he used to be a big Echo one trick. So I'm curious if Syndra starts to come back in, if he starts to bring out the Echo again, and then that would be sick. But that's what I mean, right? Like, he's so many different champions that I'm like, there has to be I want to beat you because you are better than me at this thing. And I think that's where a lot of that comes from.
Okay. What about, obviously there's some more like surprise teams here. Like, obviously Weibo did the craziest glow up of all time. They just kept blowing up, and then suddenly they're here. It was bad enough they were in the finals. Then they just swept their way through the regionals. Like, what? So what about this team? Because again, this is a team, Dagda, where if I was going to go into the regular season, almost none of these players are getting on all LPL lists or anyone's talking about them in top. But suddenly they're here again. And I tell you what, I used to be a big critic of Light when he used to play on LNG. Mate, that guy has gotten better year on year on year. He looks really good, right?
Yeah, and I think he not like got shit, but I think he was definitely downplayed because everyone was like, "Oh, we don't get Ruler at Worlds," but I was like, Light played insane. Like he has played a really, really good year, and Tarzan's a hell of a drug on the opposite side. Like Tarzan had such a glow up; it was absolutely insane. And then, as I said, I think Xiaohu kind of found his niche on the picks. Like I was actually talking to Bunch about this. It was really funny to see comments about people go saying, "I didn't know the Xiaohu could play Lucian," and I was
that hurts me. That hurts me. It's like saying, "Oh, fucking, what's this like bird champion who's playing?" Like, what are you talking about? You talking? If you don't know, by the way, guys, I think Xiaohu's stat on Lucian is something meant like 28 and 3 or something absurd like that. And that's in both top and mid, by the way. He's got some bonkers win rate. It's probably the best of all time on that champ.
Big time. And I think that's why, like, I think they kind of just found this meta that worked for him and this style that worked for him. And then Light having a phenomenal time just worked out great. So yeah, I think it was just so many things worked for him. Like, I don't know. I just could not get over how much this team almost like revolved around Tarzan when I was watching them. It was just like, if Tarzan popped off, they would have these insanely clean games where it'd just be completely fine. But it just felt like if that didn't happen, they were less sure in themselves.
By the way, are you ready, Monty? Here's the 3 things. If Chovy doesn't win Worlds, if Peanut chokes, and if Tarzan doesn't play well, we may as well quit the fucking show because all these narratives, that means the fan who doesn't watch the show and goes, they all just choke at Worlds, gets to go. So you don't need to watch. He was right at the end.
These guys know nothing.
I know, because the Tarzan...
It's the ultimate pleb. It's the ultimate pleb vindication. It's like, I didn't have to watch those other regions because I just know what happens from narrative.
The Tarzan one is the worst one because as the viewership shows, at least people do watch the LCK files, so they know by now because Peanut's won with 5 different orgs. They've got the memo. Peanut's pretty good at League, but I feel like Tarzan, I can tell who only ever watched Worlds because people think this guy sucks, and it's like you don't know how good some of his splits in the LPL are. Though he's fucking really good. He's really good, right, Dagda?
Yeah, and I think sorry, I was trying to find one of the stats that Bunch sent me over, and it was they have so Weibo as a whole have a 5% win rate when they're behind at 15 minutes. And I just love that stat so much. Whereas like if they get these early leads, and I do think they play very well around like, hey, if we get like this lead, we can set up on mid lane really, really well. I think they're very good at understanding how they can play off of Light's pressure into finding picks and playing through side lanes and everything. So I think that's where a lot of their success stems from. And even when you think back to the moments over the course of, certainly in playoffs are more so, but it was like Tarzan getting pressure on bot, stupid Nidalee spears going through minions that were just sick to watch, but like a huge amount of us were playing for Light and we're going to get him ahead. And then it just became leaning that pressure in towards the side lanes. And I think that works best for them. But the problem that I see with Weibo is that they kind of lack decisiveness a lot of the times when it comes down to like high pressure situations. So if they're in a moment where it's like do or die, breeds on Kennen, he has to go in. There's kind of the hesitation before they jump. And I think that's what's going to kill them against a lot of the really, really good teams. Because if a team like that sees blood in the water, they're just going to take it. But I think Weibo's almost second guesses themselves at times. And I think some of this can be from Crisp. I think a lot of it comes from Breathe. And if they just don't have that, I think that's where they're going to struggle. And I think they're probably the team for me because the consistently inconsistent, right, was the term for them. But I think that's where this is the team for me that if there's going to be a blow up, it'll probably be Weibo.
And then also, if people don't know, that's the other thing about League, is there are too many narratives that just get like reheated in the microwave and they're ready again for next meal. Like, are you ready, guys? Yeah, don't worry. That Tian guy had a big globe and got really awesome again. And he'll definitely do awesome at Worlds. Honest, like, oh, why every time? Also, have you noticed the trend? Anyone at jungle, right? Here's the sad thing. We all want to believe jungle is a cerebral role, it's a shot calling role, it's a macro role. But if you look, the junglers that tend to have all the success at Worlds are the people who just use their hands and just do whatever everyone else tells them, and the dogs. The ones who are the brain junglers, Peanut and Tarzan, and even to some degree, Tian's Path think it's brilliant sometimes.
Yeah,
like,
that's very
but
good.
somehow these guys, I don't know if it's the pressure of the moment. It's like their brain gets locked off from all the genius. Like it just disappears at Worlds. It evaporates off the. Because I'm telling you, if you don't watch the LPL again, you're also going to think that Tian guy was carried by Doinby. It's like, bro, he was winning MVPs without even having Doinby. That was years later. Like, but he does it every year. He has like the one skill that's all right, and he has one globe every time. He's Wittgenstein,
yeah, and I think that's like my heart breaks when it's talking about Tien, because the guy is very vocally spoken about like mental health issues and how he's struggles.
Oh, right. I know he had the wrist injuries as well. So yeah.
But like he like talks about how he breaks in those scenarios, and it's like the guy is so good. When you
that
see him
makes me feel slightly
like,
bad considering he is the person I believe who's won the most Dagda awards in history.
But you can understand, right? And I think it's a lot of the pressure coming through from fans and then his team and stuff like that.
Yes.
But, like he's an insane player. And especially when Cream was on Tristana and the guy is like, hey, we're just getting pushed. We're going to invade. We're going to just run the mill. We're going to run this entire game. It was so fun to watch. And even I actually ended up taking one of the clips for Tien's engages and like saved it on a sheet that I was sending over to some people to talk about like how LPL engages are better than LEC engages. And it's just so sick. Like he just has such a good understanding of like where he needs to be on different champions to like set up an engage. There's like, I can't remember the team they were playing against, but basically he sends this like long range Maokai ultimate the whole way down mid lane, just catches people and immediately ends the game. And I don't think I could look at any other player who would look at that situation and go, this is the time for my ultimate. There is no one in position. But he's just like, no, we're going to set this up and this is going to change the game. And he just immediately wins. And it's just like, it's moments like that where I look at him and go like, not only is your pathing really good, your understanding of who you need to play around really good, it's also like engaging. Like we know he can play team fights really well. You know, he can play the carries really well. He just has so much going for him. It's just trying to bring it to those high pressure situations. And that's where it really starts to fall apart. But I'm hoping on top he'll find it, but you just never really know.
Sure.
All right. Well, does G2 make it to semis?
I'm going to say yes. I believe in the boys.
Give me this then. Give me an angle ball. Like, can you pick out? Is there like an LPL or an LCK team that's like who do you think they can beat if they can play them? Like, if they play the quarters, they're probably going to be playing. Who would be a good draw for them? Do you think?
I think they can take Weibo.
Okay.
I think if you can disrupt LNG's game plan, I think you can take them as well. I think LNG are very much a team that plays off these like minute timing windows and that they can set up with like reset timers or like TP to a lane and then we TP back and all this kind of stuff. When I watched like Weibo play against them and watched a lot of teams play against them, they were, hey, we disrupt Weiwei and we just make it impossible for him to play the game. And suddenly this team's falling behind and they're not able to play the way that they want to. And that just kind of makes them very weak. And then Zika will coin flip it, engage, and you can win off that, right? So I think those two you can. LCK teams I haven't finished, so I can't give you an honest answer on that. But I definitely think there is a lot of failings that you can see of ways to beat teams. And we've seen G2 play through those strengths before, where like you have a good TP ward or you play for a good gank timing and bot, and if it ends up being a Lee Sin, Ari, mid lane, like dominant play, you can definitely, we've seen them work well through that style as well. And you can try and disrupt a lot of these plays. So I think it'd be really, really interesting to see. I just hope we don't give like Scout Yone and he just pops off or something. That's the other problem I'm worried about.
That would also be the biggest blue balls ever. That after all that stuff about LNG and what's other, if Scout just turns up anywhere and they're just really good, it's like, oh, it's all fun. We'll just hyping ourselves off nothing, guys. Like, what? I love it.
All right. Well, thank you, Dagda. We'll switch over to our next guest. Appreciate your time. Enjoy
it's a pleasure, lads.
your casting worlds. Everybody will see you there. All right. Bye.
Bye.
Hey guys, Worlds is upon us and it's happening in Europe. What better time? You're reminded of the glorious languages of the European continent to get your subscription to Babbel and start learning a new language today. Plus, the holidays and the new year are approaching. Might be time for you to fulfill your New Year's resolution and start learning a language besides English, which you obviously speak if you're on the Last Free Nation channel. So this is a really good program, guys, because it uses actual conversation skills. So for example, it will teach you phrases on the app on your phone, and then you'll start to use those either through voice recognition software to make sure you're pronouncing things correctly, to fake text message conversations. So you actually get to use things practically. It feels so much better than just kind of a rote learning environment. You do feel like you're getting actual knowledge that you can apply to real life situations. I've used it myself to brush up on my French, and it has been great. We have a special holiday deal for you guys, our listeners. Right now, get up to 60% off your Babbel subscriptions, but only for our LFN. At babbel.com/summoning. Get up to 60% off at babbel.com/summoning, spelled BABBEL.com/summoning. Rules and restrictions may apply.
Right, we're back for our third segment, and it is, of course, Nymaera, because the only way you'll hear him talk about Worlds, except for on his stream as well, to be fair, or his YouTube. Also, interesting update for you. He did actually just publish a video himself talking about that whole meta issue of not being hired and the struggles of being a remote caster and doing the LPL. So if you want to know about all that jazz, we won't be going into that now. He's already done a whole video.
I was careful to keep it to a personal perspective rather than disparaging anyone. I hope I walked the line.
Very professional.
I mean,
but yeah.
Even so, I would say, rather than just later on not ordering the crates that slip and smash all the milk, you probably should have thought about that a couple of years before you spilled the milk in the first place. So fine, we'll fix it on the back end.
And a lot of the times, guys, our World's Mega Preview episodes for the past couple of years have been focused on the minor regions because people don't know anything about them. I decided just to focus on the major regions this time because, who cares about plans is my take. But because you also have the LJL, we'll get a quick SoftBank Hawks update from you.
It's in my contract,
Everybody's favorite Urgot player is back at Worlds. Does SoftBank's Hawks do they get out of groups? They're in a group with GAM, 100 Thieves, and R7. So the return of Summit in the top lane to international play, which is it's just delightful.
But to Worlds no matter what. Understand that he'll go through whatever means he needs to get to Worlds. He'll be playing in fucking LCL next to us, maybe whatever he needs.
So it is worth noting. I think there is a point where the two sides of the bracket will switch over in losers bracket. Yes. I think losers can do that, so there is some chance there. I think Hawks are a good team. I think that they probably should be the fourth team out of play-ins. I think. Look, there's a world where maybe Mad with a bunch of rookies that were in ERLs last year, maybe they just have a really awful time against international competition. Something happens there, and we have another Mad play-ins incident. So there's a chance there. I could see Hawks taking a best of 3 off of them. They're a very good team at skirmishing and big wombo combos. They have strong laners for their region. We'll see whether that stacks up internationally. I think if they beat GAM, first off, that's probably the green light, though, because GAM are the one team I'm typically VCS has had a leg up over LJL on the individual matchup because they play such a fast and loose, I'm going to run down all of your summers and cooldowns, and then I'm just going to play with a slight cooldown advantage and just run the entire game that way. Very fun region to watch. Very messy if you don't understand that as their core aspect of play. But GAM, and particularly the VCS this year, I think to kind of look at Hawks' chances, you kind of have to mention the VCS stuff too, because VCS have been besides LCL, which was actually just shut down as a region, probably the most unfortunate region in the entire world. They got locked out of international play for 2 years by COVID. Because
it's weird though, because you would think that China would have been locked out by COVID too, but when China's affected, Riot just changes the rules so that China can play remotely. But never mind, the Vietnamese teams can't.
Well, and the big problem with Vietnam was if they left the country, they would not be able to get back in, and they were super hard up on that. So basically, from 2020 to 21, after, if you remember, 2018, 2019, there were some decent teams coming out of VCS. You had was it Loki that took a game off of Damwon in 2019? Yeah, they had that
upset potential for sure, and then they kind of just got stalled out.
It's why, if you remember, there was those years where Levi did a world tour of all the other regions and then just came back he just did back again.
Yeah, so they had that go off, and then the first time they could go back, GAM, who went undefeated in spring 22, I want to say, couldn't make it to MSI because they had to go compete in Southeast Asian games, not Asian games. It's a subset of that. So they went to play for that because of national pride stuff, really. So they had second seed Saigon Buffalo come in. They were great, but GAM were undefeated. So they basically just had an awful load of stuff there. And then, of course, in this year, they had the match fixing scandals. So half the players got banned. The players that are remaining obviously are not match fixers. So they're the good ones. They're the ones which kind of like managed to escape the killing there.
Weren't caught.
As far as I'm aware, it was really extensive. There are some players like Easy Love, who is the current ADC.
Exactly, all they're the absolute best match fixers, technically. You never know which it is.
Who could know, really?
True. Yeah. Okay. All right. Anyway, so these are the ones which are left. But it does mean that the talent pool on a lot of teams has been really shredded, and they haven't had a proper off season for like one team to make a real grab for all the great players. So we have like half teams kind of left in terms of their great teams. GARM still have Levi and Kiaya, great players, but they have basically been 2v8. They probably shouldn't have won VCS because Vikings, who are SOFM's team, he owns them, obviously a big, well-known player. They're a more well-rounded team, and they probably should have won VCS, but hey, GARM got away with that one. So when it kind of comes to when GARM and Vikings come into play, and so you then have to kind of say, well, okay, these aren't, if you're kind of using your benchmark from last internationals for VCS, it's probably a little low. Obviously, GARM, didn't they beat one of the NA teams or something like that back at MSI? Or yeah, they ended up doing all right at MSI. I can't actually remember the exact results, but they did better than I thought they would do with like 2 replacements, because their mid and AD carry got hit with the match fixing stuff. Still, they're not necessarily the highest firepower team. And I do think that, I had a lot of criticism for what the PCS has done for the constituent regions of it. Obviously, OS has been completely nuked at this point. OS has been completely thrown to the winds. But at least the Hawks, I think, have managed to get together a really good roster. They've been really tried and tested against good individual players, which LJL maybe have like 1 or 2 teams which are decent individual players. Obviously, DFM have, 5 players which are all high Korean Challenger, or Sengoku, similar kind of situation for them in previous splits as well. But then you're going against PCS teams now as well. We're like,
right, because basically the qualification now works because it's Asia Pacific, so they have the consolidated playoffs with PCS, LJL, and LCO. So I mean, they did have to, the road here for the Hawks was not undifficult, right? Like they lost to PSG, but they were actually, beating some of these other Taiwanese teams in the playoffs.
Yeah, there are some really good players on like Frank and DCG, who are 2 of the teams that didn't make it. I'm excited to see what they do next year in APAC, and I hope that we'll see what seed distribution is like next year and whether they get a chance from next year. But there are a couple of players in there which I've really got my eyes on. There's a guy called Jang in top lane for Frank, who's one of like the only 2 Riven players out there in the world right now, and he's so clutch on that pick. So I'm interested to see how he does in his future. He's a young player with a lot of talent. But yeah, so the Hawks made it through. Hawks have been part of the LJL for like 4 years. They came in. So Fukuoka SoftBank Hawks are sponsored by SoftBank, the huge bank. But the Fukuoka SoftBank Hawks are a Japanese baseball brand, and they've been around since like 1930s, I think, in terms of they've renamed and whatever. But they're long time franchise, and they have actually put significant resources into this team. This team's been training at the T1 Academy center, the facility they have out in Korea. They've flown out there to do some off-season content there, so they have some T1 links. One of the players they have on the roster this year is Forrest, who was a T1 Challengers player, so that connection obviously has helped a little bit in that too.
They have Vista of Hanwha infamy.
Yes.
Yeah, Vista.
One that
he's been to
Worlds
before.
To Worlds that time, yeah, exactly.
He has been to Worlds, but I will say that Forrest and Vista have been a really good engaged duo for this team, and they do really help set up a core playstyle for the Hawks, which I think is very fair weather, which is just you have really good combos from somewhere, whether that is something like Marble is a big late game scaling AD carry. He loves playing stuff like Sivir, or stuff like Smolder was pretty big for him at points too, where you just kind of throw forward and big engage with Vi, Leona, and you just chuck a Smolder out over the top of it. Misfortune's another big one for him too. And while that's happening, Ebby's been playing a lot of combo top laners like Rumble and Cannon. That's been kind of his go-tos there. So basically they have multi-role responsibility for the big combo, but they're still playing towards those big combos, which makes me feel pretty good that even if the meta changes towards different mid laners, different junglers, or whatever, they will still have that same unique that skill set to just say, right, we're pulling the trigger and we're going for this. I think where they did better than, say, DFM, which of course didn't make it this Worlds. DFM was the team which everyone knows from the LJL. They were slightly more reserved than DFM, where both of them have a bit of an issue where they will just kind of overreach for an engage, particularly when they're pressured. Sometimes Hawks, when looking for their big combos, would draft 3 losing lanes instead, because they're like, yes, I want this piece of the puzzle. no, you've just given yourself 3 losing lanes, you can't play the early game. But both them and DFM, in similar situations where they're getting a bit pushed in lane, or maybe they didn't choose the right champions for the early game, they would try and go for these snap and grab engages, and they would just completely flunk it. They would go too far. They weren't in position because they don't have that same kind of pressure from the early game to leverage these combos off of. It makes it harder to land the engage, and then they would just kind of get torn apart that way, which is why a lot of the series the Hawks did play in Best of Fives did go all the way to 5. There were definitely some situations where they would mess up some engages, and then they would fall behind, but then kind of do that same kind of game pattern all over again, and that could be a bit of an issue. But I do think that even with the meta changes coming through, they'll be fine with that one. And yeah, I think as individual players, they are very, very solid. You know, again, if you're coming out of the PCS, you are high Korean challenger as an individual player. You're not going to be just bums who've somehow made your way through to that on kind of like an individual skill level. I am kind of interested to see how Marble does and Dasher does at their first Worlds. Dasher's more veteran. He's been playing for like 7 years odd. He is a Korean who has gained Japanese residency. He's been playing in the LJL for a number of years, and he's really earned his place there. But yeah, I think Hawks, I'm optimistic for them. I think that they have shown that kind of level, that slight level of reservation when they see that Engage isn't going to work, which some minor region teams, so for instance, Brazilian teams sometimes have this issue too, where they see the big combo and they kind of flub it around a Baron or something, and it kind of throws the game. DFM were prey to that too. I'm not just calling out one big region. This is just a minor region thing. Maybe I shouldn't have said Brazilian thing. Maybe the fans will get to me at that point. But yeah, I think that Hawks have shown that kind of slight extra amount of wisdom, which makes me feel a little bit better for them. So yeah, I think for me, the 4 teams that make it out of play-ins are 100 Thieves, Mad, unless there's a historic collapse, PSG, who I think are the best team in play-ins, and then Hawks, unless Garm somehow pull a VCS over LJL Magic.
I like it. I mean, I think it's what's your take on the consolidation of the Asia-Pacific region? Because it feels like we're actually just going to get better teams out of it now, and the level of competition has gone up. Like clearly, Riot is trying to, make sure, it should bring more visibility, I think, to the region, because it's not as confusing to follow all the fragmented, it's kind of like the 5th major region that they're introducing, especially next year. And it should also, increase competition to make sure we get the best teams out there. Do you think this is good for the LJL?
If they'd done this 2 years earlier, I think it would have been better. This is the way I'm going to phrase it, because yes, I think that there are some upsides where you're streamlining things, you have a higher level of competition. You are still removing guaranteed participation from Worlds and MSI, and because you have slowly stripped back, this applies more to OS than it does to LJL, because obviously OS are no longer going to be part of APAC, I think, next year. That
Who knows?
So
they have
wild
plans.
To me.
They have mysterious plans.
It was such a vague statement. It was such a vague statement. But you think, a couple of years ago when PGG went to MSI, and they did actually all right. They managed to get a win off of Cloud9 and MSI 21, I want to say, when they made it out of that group. They made it out over Unicorns of Love, I think it was. And that way, that was a weird situation back then. I can't remember which teams exactly were involved. If you held this kind of APAC merger a couple of years ago, before all the fucking players and teams left, you would have a much better catchment of players. It frustrates me so much, because I've seen,
as in when you have people like Ari is still there and the old lineups and stuff. Do you mean?
Yeah,
right?
Ari's still in the region. He's still in DFM, but like I can think of 20 odd players which have left, which were good players, and they might not have been the best, but if they were still competing, there was a chance for them to show that flash of glory and to kind of level up again or something like that. There are a bunch of teams which have left at this point too. For instance, Blank was playing in the LJL, like ex-world champion Blank. He was actually on the Hawks. He was on the Hawks up until last year. He's been there for years, and he, at points, was in the second best team or thereabouts in the LJL. So yeah, if you held this a couple of years ago, you wouldn't have had like this slow degradation of OS and LJL to now the point where effectively what the APAC thing said was that if you do well enough in APAC or you do well enough in VCS, because obviously VCS is now joining this too, then you get to join APAC next year and you won't get booted down to the 2nd tier. Like if you could have done this at the peak of these regions' strength, you wouldn't have lost, that extra amount there. So that is a part which really annoys me. And of course, there is something about not having guaranteed representation from your region at Worlds. I think it's still probably better on a casual viewer thing, which is really important, because I think casual viewers really struggle to engage with minor region content because, one, there isn't English content and it's not even English broadcast. And then when it kind of comes to World Championships and stuff like that, you're trying to catch up on a year, sometimes multiple years of history if teams haven't made it to Worlds before. So, I mean, obviously the Hawks, they haven't made it to Worlds in 4 years of history. Now, I know 4 years of their history because I've watched almost goddamn all of their games. And I've seen them be last place in LJL to first place of LJL over the course of these years. But you're then trying to catch up with those stories within this one brief stint where they might even have just 2 best of 3s and then they're out in worst case scenario for some of these minor regions. When you have a major region like APAC, and so for instance, if they're setting up a broadcast for it, because we're going towards, Americas and APAC, and we're trying to eliminate minor regions but have 5 major regions, which means I would presume they're trying to streamline content towards these 5 directions instead of trying to cover a load of minor regions at the same time. That will definitely help brand build and kind of hero build a lot of these players. So I see the upsides. I'll also say as well, I think the people in charge of kind of product management for PCS, I don't think this was necessarily something that they chose. I think this is kind of like a chalice that was handed to them. I think they've done a pretty good job to make this very engaging. I've loved the PCS Plus through spring and summer. And if we get that similar level of kind of mini international competition throughout playoffs and then just a regular season as well coming next year into APAC, I am pretty happy with that. They're also doing an Ascension style-ish format as well, where you have 4 teams which are solid within the franchise of APAC. You have 4 partner teams and then 4 which I think can promote and relegate. I would imagine through the tier 2. We don't know what that looks like yet. So there are some bonuses to this, but mixed feelings is what I come away with, and I really need to see what the hell's going to happen with regions like OS, which have just been dunked on throughout this whole process as well.
All right, let's switch over to LPL. So we had the conversation about Knights. Now, clearly, I mean, you as the ultimate Ahri enthusiast should probably be pretty happy about what is probably going to be a pretty good Ahri showing at Worlds. Obviously, players like Knight have been excellent on this champion. Do you think, is your early prediction BLG wins Worlds, or are you, because you watch a lot of LCK, because I know you do the show with Rich and Kyria as well on LCK. So what are your thoughts about who is going to take it?
Which, by the way, is a banger name.
Complaint Struck.
That's
it's
really
great.
funny name.
Yeah. Nah, credit to Rich for that one. He basically puts a different complaint on the truck graphic each episode. I actually don't get to see it until the episode airs as well. So I just see it through Discord like this. Right. So I just have to leave, sit there and wait to see what he's throwing us under the bus for that one. But I think I've sat and thought about this a lot, because obviously you have to compare to teams like HLE, LCK champions, and still particularly GenG, because GenG have such a stacked roster as well. T1 are a threat with a lot of the meta changes too, as much as that looming oh god world's narratives are all going to be T1. Because
are you officially a Faker fan or a T1 fan? By the way, I notice you always do have angles for them. Are you officially a fan?
Let me go get this thing.
Come on, he's gonna pull out like the actual Ahri thing right now, isn't he? I know.
No,
what is this?
I've got my T1 mouse fan. Yeah, I'm a T1 fan. Like, I started playing League of Legends because I saw a compilation video of Faker playing Ahri at 2013 Worlds, which kind of links the champion and the player. I've followed him since the early days at that point.
The famous Ahri game with the 12-minute inhib push at
OMG second round robin. Yeah. And then he had that one shot onto Dexter as well against Lemon Dogs and the Baron Pit. Dude was just an absolute stud back then, and the flashy level of play was really, really cool back then. Got very fond memories of following him. I will say, being in the pro scene for a few years now, I still am very much a Faker fan and a T1 fan. I feel like the more you get into League, the more you want to diversify the amount of storylines you kind of expose yourself to, though. After a while, hearing the same storyline about Faker and T1 gets a little bit old. I would quite like to hear about LNG and Scow, or JDG when they come out of places, or teams like Top Esports, which have not quite reached that upper echelons of international trophies and stuff like that. So I've definitely chilled out a little bit on kind of the hyper fan route there. But yeah, I'm a huge fan of Faker and T1. I think it's hard not to be when you came from that era when he was kind of defining the way that you play that game.
All right, tell us the secret then. How does one be a lifelong fan within the context of League of Faker, but then not have to assign yourself the opinion he can still be the best and he can be better than Chovy and Night? How do you do it? Because no one else has figured it out. So you're the Daywalker, apparently. You have all of their strengths and all their weaknesses, apparently, Nymaera. So how do you do it there? How do you do it?
With great difficulty, honestly. Right. Okay. With great difficulty, because I think this is the problem when you talk about players with such a history and a brand. You expose yourself to an absolute ocean of casual viewers which have been only exposed to those snippets of high level commentary, but they only hear about the top 1-2 players which are kind of talked about on certain levels. And it is quite difficult because, so for instance, being so heavily involved in LPL now this year and the last year too, if you look back at the last World's opening ceremony from 2023, I think it was actually Ashin that told me this. I think the pre-show is about 65 minutes. I think about 10 minutes of that was to Weibo last finals, and I think the rest of it was pretty much T1. Like it might not be as egregious as that.
To be fair, like that was a pretty one-sided matchup. But I mean, I think
but in terms of the pre-show, before the games have even be played, like that should still be. And then the problem is like
Nymaera, you don't have to worry about that this time, because the world's final pre-show this time will be 90% Arcane advertisements, because it comes out 1 week later. Sure. So it won't even be about esports at all. So don't worry about it.
So I know what you mean though, because the egregious thing about that is this, right? Even though Weibo, the team, was a surprise to be there, bro, they have the Shy and fucking Xiaohu in the team. Like, it's not, these guys have, like, the Shy's won Worlds and Yahoo's won MSI a million times. Like,
won Worlds
at this point in time, like the story's right there for you to build those angles in. Like, I agree with you. Look, you still would have shifted it to T1 side, but it should have been maybe like 60-40 T1. You know what I mean?
But then, like, the common complaint is, but we don't know enough about these teams. They don't have the compelling stories. They can't have compelling stories if you don't start. You have to start somewhere.
Yes.
Like, and this is the thing which really annoys me.
I was tweeting that, earlier. I was tweeting like a month ago saying like, Knight versus Chovy is the main storyline of League of Legends right now. These are the two years, for sure. Yeah, these are the two biggest names. They've been in, both of them have been in 6 consecutive domestic finals.
This would be the protagonist and antagonist, or like two protagonists. It would just be these two guys,
especially after having like such a one-sided defeat in like MSI finals as well. Knight crawls his way back after a difficult summer, turns it on in summer playoffs, and then comes towards well like that. Yeah, it absolutely writes itself, particularly with the meta changes coming through for BLG. Very much, I think, more in favor for them than it would be for someone like Chovy, compared to the field of mid laners. So I think the other mid laners are gaining more from this on that front. So I guess in terms of my part within that, in terms of like, how do I be a fan of XYZ, but then not necessarily just be the mouthpiece for our Lord and Saviors. It is very difficult, because then I find myself in a position where I have to be one of those people that, which it very much is, trying to start those stories and trying to connect them for long enough that people give a damn about them. And sometimes they land. I did the Weibo consistently inconsistent thing. That was a me thing. That stuck around for a year. That's a small thing, but we're doing that with like very little backup and much less eyes on us than other folks. I will say it really helps when you have folks like Cage Line will dominate when they and people like yourself as well, that kind of make these bigger content things which get it to more different eyes, and then you talk through that these talking points and story points in different fashions, and then you have like a variety of opinions. It just helps inform and expose people to this a little bit more. And I mean, the easiest way for me to deal with this stuff is that I just like good League of Legends. No, I mean that's the end of it, right? I just like good League of Legends. I watch LCK. I enjoy LCK. I watch obviously a ton of LPL, and I love that too. And I see the differences between them, but the best way to handle this is just to be a fan of the best League of Legends, and that will guide you to the storylines which you want to talk about in the first place. So yeah, that's largely the philosophy I go into it. Of course, sometimes you have to take a bit of a dip and go, well, this will land better, even though it's probably not 100% true. But that's the starting point which I go for.
By the way, being as when we did the Dagda section, we talked about some LPL, but actually some of the teams we didn't really get to. Like, for example, mainly because no one still knows fully it's resolved. The LNG angle, obviously the entire discussion has to be kept around, is Scout actually the player? Has it been resolved yet? Isn't it like 99% that's going to be Scout now? Isn't it implied?
I don't have specific context or whatever, but the people that I talk to seem to be more knowledgeable about it, seem to suggest that Scout's through. I think even Gala played part of the bail as well. That was the last thing I heard. I think he put some money to the cause. Maybe Gala didn't want to play with the substitute mid laner.
I mean, everyone made the joke before, like Ruler was paying or whatever. Like, the joke is Gala should pay to not end up like fucking Ruler, mate. That's why you should be paying to get the fuck out there. You know what it was like. Exactly, you know what that guy was like. Because I'm also thinking, if we're thinking of a meta switch, if there's really a world where you're saying, Monty, to reference the last segment, if there's a world where Aphelios is coming back, right? Gala actually didn't have the best summer split. I would love to see that guy fucking back on the Aphelios. This guy's a monster.
I actually think Gala did have a good summer split, and I think it's been massively underrated.
Playoffs were whatever for me, but yeah.
Okay, so yes, the playoffs weren't great, but if you look through like their actual Ascension group, Gala beat Ruler in a series for the first time ever, I think, in his career. He had a series versus Jaculov where he just straight up diffed Jaculov as well. I think this has actually been one of Gala's best individual splits from that standpoint. Yeah, I mean, they bombed out of playoffs. There were a bunch of problems.
He's always been a good Ziggs player too, and in this meta,
he's the best Ziggs in the LPL,
having a Ziggs player is very important. So.
Yeah, so like, I mean, that's just a little caveat I'll put there. Yeah, absolutely true. I think his playoffs were not what he would have wanted, but LNG, by the way, this is just a bit of a tangent. They're the only team which, when we've had the double elimination in the LPL, they're the only top 2 team which has bombed out without winning a single series. Oh wow! So they went from they were second seed and they bombed out, losing both best of 5s in a row. Never happened to a top 2 seed in playoffs before, and I think that's been since 2021. So that's been over 3 years. A bunch of playoffs. Like, you would have expected maybe another team to do that before, but LNG, they're really disappointed in playoffs.
At least in solo queue on this patch as well, Kai'Sa is way up there. So obviously having Gala on Kai'Sa is going to be potentially a massive, massive difference maker. So I think, LNG, look, they're not the same team that they were last year. Like I do think that, there a lot of their macro expertise left when Tarzan left this roster, and so they don't have that same formidable kind of mid and late game shot calling, but they're still, obviously a very good team, and Scout has been extremely good. He started out a bit ropey right in summer, but he's been extremely good. His Yone's been surprisingly good for a player that we don't typically associate with the Yone, and that'll still continue to be a threat. So as long as he can be there, obviously Yagao would be a massive downgrade.
He's just a different archetype of player, which is just so different.
He was also just individually performing badly.
Yeah.
Beyond that.
Yeah.
Also, by the way, if you only watch Worlds, what's sad is almost the same narrative played out. Like, that Zika guy isn't actually like the world's best top player, but he did a glow up again. He actually looked like at the end he got stronger again, right in the world. So it's like, I know everyone felt he was overhyped because of playoffs last year.
He's like the Keane of China. He's the guy who does his job.
He's the unsung hero, 100%.
Yeah.
When LNG sucked in spring, and God, LNG sucked for most of this year.
Yep.
Zuko was the one guy that was like really still pulling his weight and like making game-changing decisions in team fights and stuff like Asante. So yeah, when the conversation comes about LNG, you do have to talk about Scout, and that is completely correct. However, spare a thought for some of these other players too. Yeah. Worth noting that probably the biggest thing, because this ties in Weibo as well, Weibo and LNG basically took their junglers and switched them on teams. So we had 2 very different mid jungles with 2 players on either team, which played a very similar style. I think Scout and Tarzan are both kind of like, they are the flowchart players. They have, I'm making this play, and Dagda was talking about them hitting certain timings earlier. I did have a listen into that in terms of like, yes, we're using very specific wave states and timings and resets to make this happen. Scout and Tarzan are very much playing from the same book when they do that, and they worked very much in tandem for that. Scout would get control on something like a Jace, and then suddenly when Tarzan would go into the jungle, a shock blast can come in from half a screen away. It's effectively a semi-global. It's not quite the same, but it's worth thinking about it in the same kind of way. And then you looked at Xiaohu and Weiwei, much more free-flowing, much more, I like to call Weiwei more like a jungle gremlin, where he just kind of hits level 3, and you just mess around your jungle. He has a great time of it. Poppy, Rel back then, Trundle was another big pick of his as well. And Xiaohu is very happy to play towards that too, because Xiaohu has also been one of those very freeform, reactive, play in the heat of the moment kind of players, and just kind of use his experience and expertise to work his way through fog of war and use his playmaking tools very effectively. Okay, so when you switch the junglers out of them to the player of the opposite style to which they're playing, it takes a lot of time to get that right. And that's why LNG and Weibo sucked for like 90% of this year. Yep. They sucked so much. And then it kind of came around to, Weibo were like a series off of not making it into the Ascension group.
Oh,
they got beaten. Like, look, I love this team. The team that beat them, they lost to Ultra Prime twice in series. Now, if you don't know who that team is, you don't know who that team is because they've not exactly been relevant. Now they're great. I love their social media guys as well. They're a really fun team to kind of be tangentially involved with. But Weibo did not start this year very well, this summer very well, because of course they had the changes from top jungle to Breathe and then Tarzan coming in later into the year. And that integration took time, and it took a lot of losses as well to figure stuff out, because effectively what you had to do is find a compromise between Tarzan and Xiaohu, where Xiaohu could kind of bend towards Tarzan's more methodical style of play, where he does go for these very intricate, well thought out early pathing decisions, where he will choose to go a slightly different route to get towards bot lane to pressure them well, or towards top lane to put Breathe ahead on something like a Nasus matchup or a Renekton where he can stomp lane, and then kind of transition into like a side lane style where again Tarzan is kind of controlling the flow of the game. Xiaohu isn't the center of this team in the way that he was on someone like RNG, which is a very different style for him. He's had to reinvent himself. And Xiaohu had an awful year because of that, honestly. Up until like really into last bits of summer and
you have to ask yourself for real, if it wasn't viable for him to pick the Lucian and there wasn't the Zeri and the Corki, like, bro, these picks really helped him at the end when it got to the playoffs. Like, I feel like, because I'm with you, this isn't the old RNG where he was the man, and even in the Uzi team, it was still him and Uzi. Like, in this team, he just sort of like fills out just doing a captain's role for me in this team. But he's clutch. He has got the clutch factor.
Oh yeah, he has been, and I think what Xiaohu's doing is very. I mean, because obviously on the LNG side of it, we can get to that too. Because like Scout and then Weiwei had to do a very similar kind of well, who's compromising with who kind of thing. It was actually Scout leading the team from that. So it's the LNG boys from last year who were kind of leading that. But on the Weibo note, we had a very serious conversation as LPL casters some way through maybe even through spring a little bit, but particularly in summer, thinking, look, Xiaohu's looked awful since Worlds last year.
Yeah.
Ever since Worlds last year, where he had like some moments, but he was again quite shaky, especially compared to his summer. Xiaohu really looked like maybe this was the end of his career because this guy was playing very, very poorly.
No, you have to ask yourself that question. If they lost that series and didn't make it in the top group and didn't make a run, maybe he just retires after this year, bro. Maybe he goes the way of the Maples of the world. Yeah, why not?
In the first stage of LPL in summer, one stat which really stands out. The MVP, he had the most MVPs against him in his role of any player in LPL. I think it's something like 7 or 8 MVPs came from his direct opponent because they just smashed him so hard. And of course, there are other reasons for that too. But that, again, that's just another kind of tagline you can put on there to say, okay, well, Xiaohu really was probably the worst he's been playing in his career. The way that
these last 2 years are the last 2 years of his career. It's mad because he made it to the World Finals last year, and this year's going to be Worlds again.
And last year wasn't awful.
But here's the difference, though. He was nowhere close to those all LPL teams. Remember, he used to be like an MVP candidate every split. Like, I don't think people actually realize how high the heights of this guy's career was. It's why it wasn't even just a diss against Faker when I said Xiaohu's who they think Faker is. Xiaohu also isn't the old Xiaohu. Like, he's a very different player himself now.
You look over his history, you can make an argument for top 3 all-time mid laners. I mean, he's one of the greatest players of all time. Maybe not one of the most flashy players.
It's only this final now, guys, that Knight equaled his record of active players of LPL titles, and the other guy is fucking Clearlove, who played a million years for every good team. So, like, that's how insane this is.
There is a lot of,
I think, EDG.
I mean, I think there is a lot of general, underrepresentation, obviously, of these LPL players in terms of the narrative of best of all time, because as we've said, fans have asked us to like redo our best players, like goats of each role, and like Mako has to be in that conversation. Mako had a very good summer split. He did not have a very good summer playoffs, but he's still like really fucking good, and like probably, in my mind, he probably is the best support player of all time, given the longevity of his career.
Monty, he was all LPL second team off the top of my head or maybe even first. I think it was actually the first. I think it was the first support. Yeah. In summer of 2024, Monty, he won MSI in 2015, bro. Like that. Yeah, that's like mind-blowing longevity. That is impossible.
I think he has the most All-Pro awards for any individual player in any role of LPL.
I calculated something like 10 or 11 or something, mate. It was bonkers.
I don't even think it's close. Yeah, he's really
I always give this stat because it's so gangster. At the end of every year, they vote the best player in that role, right? Mako has won it something like 5 times, support player of the year. No one else has won 2. As in, pick anyone else. Ming, all those, Martin, no one else even won 2. This guy won 5 of them motherfuckers. That's like some bullshit, mate. That is bullshit.
The funniest thing I find about the LPL awards at the end of the year is they literally have an award which is most popular player in the LPL as well. And so the Shy won every single year he was available to, except for 2021 when Jeja, who won Worlds, got that as well. So just to put it in context in terms of like who their fan favorites are. So that.
By the way, why don't we just make that award for the LCK? Then you could just give Faker every year most popular award. Then we can give the real players like Toby, the HLE and GenG. We fixed it. We fixed League. Right. There you go. Like, come on.
I want to talk about top esports because we didn't really get into that previously. True. And like top is a team that. So they do really well at the Esports World Cup. They come back, they lose their first couple of matches, but then they win like 7 matches in a row without even dropping a game heading into the playoffs. But then their playoffs performance is really kind of mediocre.
They were supposed to be in the finals, but
they were supposed to be in the finals for sure, right? Yes. And Jackie Love's been performing at an amazing level this year. Feels like Cream's meta, it's Yone and AD champions. Mako's great on these engaged supports. Tian is a very cerebral jungler.
Yeah,
369 is, he's become, not to say he wasn't versatile before, but compared to last year on JDG, he's had to take up more of the carry role on this team, which is great. He's a very good carry player.
His 2020 self.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So it's like it's a return to kind of his old way of playing, but he has more of a pronounced role in terms of carry on this team that he did last year. So what happened, in your opinion, and why was Top Esports like? We should not be seeing Weibo in this final, if we're being honest. Like we should be seeing Top Esports here.
Well, yeah, I mean, like Weibo have like a very high upper level if you look at the names on paper, but that's just not what we'd seen from them in this summer. Like you can make the argument that LNG and Weibo fooled us into thinking they were bad teams, and then they finally showed us what they could do at the end of the year. That still doesn't tell the story of like, well, look, Top Esports up until playoff. Well, I mean, yeah, the BLG stuff's a bit weird because BLG are all over the place. Top Esports were the best team in the LPL for sizable amounts this summer. That is indisputable. They were versatile. They were dynamic. They played macro in a very different way to a lot of other teams too. For instance, like they were one of the few teams that would contest you at both Grub's first spawn and Dragon's first spawn. Basically, everyone was handshaking, whereas Tien would be like, "Yeah, no, I'm gonna have a winning bot lane. I can just go towards this instead, and I can contest you on both sides of the map." No one else was really doing that. That led them to get huge early game advantages. That allowed them to snowball through things. Him and Tien and Mako would move across the map really, really well to kind of exacerbate those kind of leads as well. Fantastic team throughout the majority of summer. But this team has choking issues. They have just massive mental fortitude issues. And that's the only thing which I can really come down to in my head in terms of, well, why are they just failing at these elimination high pressure matches? The BLG series and playoffs I put less weight onto because BLG was so goddamn good. That to me is like, I can kind of put that in a box on the side and say, look, that's a BLG thing, not a top thing. Right. But losing to Weibo in the way that they did, that to me is a big alarm bell again, because now if you look at Top Esports, well, I suppose this is going to be a little bit slanted anyway, but like if you look at their record and the way that they play in elimination matches throughout all of this year, it is absolutely shocking. The way they played against G2 at MSI when they got knocked out there, the way that they played in
WC, they won the first game, then just got bodied after that. As soon as they're in elimination point, they half as good. It's insane.
And then the spring finals also awful as well. That one wasn't necessarily like a BLG complete smash because they were in the same way of the summer finals, upper bracket. But like spring finals was not good. Imagine us flying out to do our one little bit of studio stuff in spring. Goddamn, this is our finals. Are you kidding me? For Top
we have the saying in English.
Cool.
It's the idiom we use in English is we say they flatter to deceive. Like they always hype you that they're going to be. By the way, it's just also TN style. To be fair, they always make you believe they're so good, and then somehow they just crack and completely shatter.
Yeah. But the one difference I'll say for this summer playoffs against Weibo is that the choking did not, for me, come from Tien in this series. I actually think Tien played pretty well in this one series. I think Mako had an absolute shocker. I have no idea what's happened to Mako in a lot of these series too. I think that it would be a mistake to narrow the view down to just Tien teams choking and stuff like that. I think that, yes, he can be a part of that, and I think he was at MSI versus G2 for large parts of it, even though he played very well against GenG earlier in that tournament. I think Spring Finals was also a Tien choke as well. This summer, this playoffs was not necessarily about him. I think Mako played very poorly. I think that 369 is in a really weird spot now where 369 team fighting is still some of the very best that League of Legends has to offer. His team fighting is absolutely absurd. If you want to know why AD carries look so good on teams with 369, look at the way that he peels for them in team fights. It is absolutely absurd. He's the best peel top laner of all time to me. It is unreal what he manages to do like that. And then, but the problem is that, so that's a good part of his game. And his team fighting has been good pretty much the whole year round. That's been awesome. His individual laning and particularly his side laning has been really suspect though. He's got stuff like, he'll get a lane lead on Renekton and then he'll go into a side lane and then he'll just end up in a 1v2 because even though he can beat the other guy in a 1v1, he just hasn't judge the map well, and he end up in a 1v2 or a 1v3 with a position where his team can't even really respond to that or go somewhere else on the map to make another play too. So there are holes in 369's game as well, even though that some of his gameplay is some of the very best in the world. I think Cream, when he played against Knight, absolutely bodied. When he played against Xiaohu, he was solo killed a million times, and that was a huge issue. Yep. Cream. This was a very important year for Cream. He's not a rookie anymore. He's been playing since 21, 22. He is kind of just beyond that rookie kind of bracket right now. And this was his time to really think, can I become an elite mid laner in the LPL? I think it's been shown with some of his games.
He's got the team Nymaera where if he's good enough, he can win everything with this team. He's got
exactly.
I think how many other mids must be looking at this thinking, give me that squad, mate. I would win everything.
Yeah, this is like the cusp player dream where you have everything right on your roster with all players which are versatile, can do whatever you want. This is your chance to use that to not have any excuses to say like, oh, but these players would let me down or something like that on an individual level through that. But Cream was dumpstered by Xiaohu in a 1v1, dumpstered by Knight in a 1v1, and even against Scout. You look back again, okay, not the series that they won 3-0 against them in playoffs, but even you look back earlier in summer, the LNG series that they played, because they were in the same group at the start of the year as well. Scout was doing well into Cream, even individually back then. There was like one game where Scout played a really bad LeBlanc game and whatever, but that was largely through a level 1 snowball, which got really strange. On the whole, Cream didn't play individually well into the other top tier mids, so that didn't help either. I am very intrigued to see how he does at Worlds, because he has become a mage player. In fact, I was even pitching a parody video to LPL, but we didn't exactly have content budget to do like a Mulan make a mage out of you kind of Disney cover, because he was like he was like the melee only player, and then he started playing Karma and Wave.
Monty a bit too far now, you know. He used to do the shit 4 tunes back in the day. It's all good.
Yeah. Hey, we call it inspiration here. But yeah. God, we also had a content pitch for like the curse of Rookie for not making Worlds. Would have been even more fucking hilarious with the whole Scout situation as well.
Here's what I actually, for real, do want you to do, Nymaera. Just for me, Monty would hate it. He actually hates that fucking pictures on the internet. But you're the only person who could recreate that amazing picture of Monty in that leather jacket. Just listen, you could just do that for me. Just do a parody picture of that. That's all I want. I think the resemblance could look really good if you do that exact style. You know,
I'll get back to it. Like, I'll see what I can do. But,
I think it'll be banger. I think the memes is like this fuck me.
but like on the top esports thing, like this team is just so frustrating now because they have the player caliber. It's just like there's so many different players now which are choking different ways. Even Jackulov in late game team fights hasn't really been delivering it. It wasn't delivering in playoffs in the same way. Yep. So my hope for top esports is they are viewed as underdogs, and I actually think top esports will do better the harder draw they get. I think that they can slip up to opponents where they're I guess the analogy I'd use is that when you have 2 favorites at a chess tournament, they don't look at their direct opponent. They look over their shoulder and see what the other guy's playing, because they know they'll be facing them later and they want to read up on that. I think top esports can slip up against opponents they don't respect. I think that G2 did that to them, especially in bot lane 2v2.
Oh, sure.
And I think that, top esports could weirdly be a team which could be upset by intricate level 1 plans, some weird bot lane picks which upset Mako and his macro impacts. And yeah, I think maybe even a Western team could take a game off of top esports. I think that is with this kind of logic, I could see that tracking through. So I actually think top esports will do better the harder draw they have, because it means all of their focus is on the here and now. And also, if it's in Swiss stage, it's not direct elimination as well. If it's not elimination and they are viewed as underdogs against hard opponents, I think they'll play better. So I kind of hope that they do get drawn against, some LCK seeds or whatever in the first round, and they just keep like getting hard opponents as they go through. I think they will probably see a better version of them, because I don't know what the hell is going on with this team mentally. I have some real issues like across the board, even when it's not Tien choking, and that's still a possibility. Tien could still choke as well, and everything could still fall apart.
I hope we see Top versus Hanwha and see who chokes more between Tien and Peanut. That'd
be so funny, man. That'd be so funny.
I mean, by the way, it is just so bonkers to think that the same team that 2-0 GenG at the EWC can then just lose to seemingly anyone in a BO5. It's bonkers, isn't it?
But I think that's because they were underdogs. I think it's because they were viewed as underdogs. I think that really helps them.
They also had a very good read, I will say, coming into Esports World Cup, because I mean they were playing like Trist as Ivern, and
the Ash Braum was insane too.
Yeah. GenG had no idea what to do into that. So, we'll see about the meta reads coming in. All right, so the real question is, do you think is going to win Worlds? Is the glow up of Knight's champion pool going to be enough to push BLG there? Is GenG still the favorite? Do you have a dark horse pick?
I think it's BLG for me now. And I've taken a long time to think about this too, but I just think that all of the changes coming through, a lot of it's focused on mid. Some of it's going to go towards jungle as well. I was actually chatting with Emily Rand just yesterday too about some of this too, because she was like very passionate about a lot of the changes elsewhere on the map. Of course, Knight, arguably the best Syndra player of all time. It's like him or Showmaker, right? One of the two, I think. If we're getting a lot of AP burst champions back in mid lane, Nico, he's probably the best Nico of all time. If Ari's back, I think he is by far the best Ari of all time. I think this guy's absolutely insane on that. Weirdly, he lost his Ari win streak this summer against Scout. We won't talk about that game. That was really bad. But he's probably the best Ari player of all time. If Silas comes back, oh my god, his Silas is absolutely disgusting. And Dagda talked about a bunch of these things earlier. So this is community consensus. This is not controversial to say. And these are the kind of picks which I do think that Knight in a 1v1 against Chovy could outvalue heavily. I think he could do that.
By the way, what do you think on that point I asked Dagda about? He had an interesting thing. What do you think of that? Because I actually sort of do buy if you do the shonen anime narrative for Knight. I see what he means where if you do the whole thing of he was always chasing Yagao, who he's obviously better than, but just had more success initially. And now he's sort of doing that with Chovy and the others, etc. Do you buy that? Because you know what I mean? That point I had about the fact that even back in top esports, every time this guy came to Worlds and I hyped him to all my friends, they would just fucking opt in as some stupid draft where it's like he's not playing any of the shots, so I'm dominate the LPL on. Like, what do you think of that? Because like you're saying, there are a million picks that might be available that are Knight picks, but if he just opts into the Azir, it's going to bomb everyone out. You know what I mean? So what do you think? Why does he do that? Do you think it's like that angle that he's trying to like prove he can do everything or something like that? You know?
I actually think, I mean, there have definitely been at points where Knight has been that guy to just like do the ego move. There was a talk, but he was on stream with 369 because obviously they were top esports compatriots for a long time, and they were talking about like, man, we just don't go for those solo kills anymore. And they were talking about, I think they were even talking about Cream and saying like, wow, look at like this crazy outplay he's got or something like that. And they're saying, yeah, I used to do that back in my first year of play as well. And they've kind of mellowed out and they've become like the more veteran players that play for the team and stuff like that. I will say the body language of Knight this summer is really quite weird to me. He did not give a fuck throughout most of this summer. He was just
he played really badly at the start of it.
Yeah, but what he was doing, and sometimes I think it's like he would actually get huge value out of this a lot of the time he played too. But like this guy would just push in every wave. He'd trade all of his HP, sometimes for worse situations, but he'd always get pro in mid and he'd always put his body on the line. But he didn't really care that much. Like he would put himself at risk 24/7. And then it really took until like this playoffs for him to kind of like find that kind of honed cutting edge to kind of still play on the knife's edge like that, where he was pushing in very early, dominating the early lanes. Like he was getting solo kills on Smolder. Like that, I know that Smolder got buffed and he's going to be nerfed here for Worlds, but that just shouldn't be the case. He got like, I think game 1 of finals, he got like, what, 3 solo kills on Smolder early game? It's not what the champion's going to be doing. And I think he really just locked in for this playoffs. And if he plays like that in Worlds, this guy's going to be on another level. I don't necessarily think he's at that kind of ego level that he was at that point. I think he's doing it for himself, and I think he's just locked into his own game. Sometimes I think just the rest of the game kind of like zones out, and he's just like making his own plays like that. But yeah, I think there's I want to see if you can kind of keep up that mindset where you can kind of like again find that honed kind of cutting edge like that. I will say, you know, last year in terms of the internationals, I think that he was much better at picking towards the stuff which would work better for him. I think, so for instance, this is probably something which goes massively under talked about. The play which everyone talks about from T1 JDG is the Faker play on Azir.
Oh, sure.
If that play hadn't happened, just before that, Knight hits a unassisted double Talia shove onto 2 people around Baron, kills them both, gets them the Baron, probably should have won the game. If JDG had won that game and won the series, that is the play you would be remembering, not Faker's shuffle. Knight was actually not like this quiet, like servile figure or whatever to JDG in that series. He actually played very well. I did like a 4-hour breakdown of it because there's obviously so much to talk about in that series. I think that Knight actually had a pretty damn good Worlds last year, and his MSI was obviously mega. He was like MVP of that tournament. His Nico and Annie play was absolutely absurd. So, you know, if I look at the last year of play when he was kind of on that kind of level, I have much less complaints about that. MSI was just strange. I don't think a BLG really found themselves a way to deal with Chovy's just resource management and acquirement kind of playstyle where like eventually Chovy just becomes inevitable. Here's the thing though, Nymaera, even though I do agree, I thought GenG looked way better. They were also the only team to take GenG to 5 games though. That did happen. Everyone else couldn't do it. No one else in the tournament did. So if that's them at their worst, that's another reason to think if they glow up, they can win the tournament. And I think there's so outside of that as well, because I was again talking about this with Emily, you know, Jax has buffs. Bin Jax, he can still play stuff like the Camille as well. That's absolutely important too. If we have stuff like the you know, Nico, Syndra, stuff like that coming through too, immobile mid laners, stuff like that, we're going to see a lot more Jarvan, which Way is fantastic.
Aatrox is also like #1 top lane pick in solo queue right now.
One thing I really appreciate about Bin is that he's actually doing what Jackie Love used to do as ADC on IG, which is he's going like, I know in theory I'm supposed to probably play weak side now to help that other lane on the other side of the map, but what if I just didn't and I still picked my carry anyway and just played like I was the carry? And you know what? Here's the problem. If you can ever make that work, it's fucking really hard because then the jungle can only be in one lane at a time. And he sort of makes it work, Billy. He just plays the Renekton even if they're playing well. He doesn't give a fuck. So he just plays it anyway.
Spring had the lowest jungle proximity. Look, we didn't get stat support for LPL, so we had to find all the shit ourselves because, of course, we don't get stats.
Sure.
But like Bin had the lowest jungle proximity of any top laner in the LPL.
No doubt. I bet she was just permanently with Knighton in the bot lane. Yeah, of course.
And the best laning stats.
There
so
you
he
go.
had 0 jungle presence and still the best laning stats. So that's
it's also that I think he's like the best top Renekton player in the world in that, you know,
and best Norrøn's Renekton player too. Right now.
Yeah. So like, you know, when you look at his Renekton play, he actually pressures and like he takes a lead from lane and then pressures enemy ADs in a way that nobody else does in team fights. He's just been really solid. And we can argue about the effectiveness of prioritizing top lane Renekton picks, but you can't argue it on Bin because he actually translates those lane leads into meaningful team fight situations.
So specifically for BLG, and this is one of the reasons why I do think that, so this is partly, you know, I've seen some people say that, you know, they're inconsistent, there are holes in their play and stuff like that. There is some credits to that, but this is also a part of their play style. BLG are not the LNG flowchart style of play kind of team. They are very, very opportunistic. They will spot you in the wrong part of the map, and if they ever get a global teleport lead or they get one person ahead on the map, they will use those advantages to find advantages in a way maybe you didn't expect from the draft. You know, maybe they do get Bin ahead in a matchup in top lane, which, you know, is, I don't know, what if he's playing something like Skarner and he gets ahead on something like Skarner? He did that at points in spring or something like that, or whenever it was in summer. I think that Bin is one of these players where even when he's not given the resources, he can sometimes just get ahead. And BLG respond to someone getting ahead on their own team very, very well, whether that's Knight on Corki or Yone or something like that. Tristana, he actually glowed up on that a lot towards the end of summer. Bin on his various carries. Elk on stuff like Kai'Sa. Oh my god, this guy is good at playing through that as well. And we even saw that, of course, with Wei, because Wei has been a really solid, consistent player too when he's been playing carries or facilitative players. I think BLG, regardless of the meta shifts, which I think a lot of them work out for them, whether it's in top lane or in mid lane, of course, Jace is probably good right now, and I think that Knight is one of the best Jace players. I think LPL is actually one of the... I think LPL are worse at top lane Jace than LCK, but their mid lane is a shit hot at Jace, so I think that could be really important for overall region balance. But yeah, I think with all of these changes coming through and just giving these slight openings for individual excellence to rule a game from BLG, with the changes coming through, I think that, I think they're in with a really good shot at Worlds. Look, it's going to be a tight tournament. I think that there are a lot of teams which I'm very excited to see. I think this is not like a one-team-centric Worlds, which I'm really glad about. I think I'm going to echo what Dagda said before as well. I'm glad that the Golden Road isn't here. It would have overruled so much more interesting conversations. But yeah, I think BLG for me, with everything coming through, the AP Burst champions coming through for Knight and stuff like Jax being even more powerful for Bin, I think BLG probably my front runner, and that's not just as an, LPL hopeful.
Well, very good. Are you going to be making content around Worlds? Where can people find you? Because you're not on the broadcast, sadly.
Yeah, well, we'll see. So I actually I got tickets for playing, so you'll probably see me in the crowd, maybe on the camera if I make it onto there. I didn't get co-streaming rights, so maybe I'll go badger some other co-streamers, see if they want to have my voice in the background. I'll probably be doing some content here or there. I've been making more stuff on my YouTube channel, so I'm making some short content on that, so you can just probably search Nymaera and you'll probably find me. It's not like anyone's got that name, really. I haven't really figured out everything in regards to that. It's been a long year for me, so I'm taking this as a little bit of a break, but still, Worlds is World. Want to make some content around that for sure.
Fair enough. All right, thanks, man. BLG winning Worlds. We'll probably see you on as a guest sometime during Worlds on one of our shows, I'm sure.
Sounds good.
We'll catch you later. Now, if you're having a long work day with not so much time to take breaks, you may want to go ahead and pick up some Factor meals. We're having a long day on this World's Mega Preview. They go for hours and hours and hours. And, having a Factor meal in your refrigerator ready to heat up in just 2 minutes without having to worry about ordering some takeout or cooking for yourself makes your day just a little bit better. Not only that, these chef-crafted, never frozen meals are available for you in just 2 minutes of reheating in the microwave, and they have various dietitian-approved options, such as Calorie Smart, Protein Plus, or Keto even. You got 35 different meals to choose from every week, and they do cycles, so to make sure you never get bored, as well as 60 possible add-ons, including breakfast items and items like protein shakes. Head to factormeals.com/LFN50 and use code LFN50 to get 50% off your first box plus 20% off your next month. That's code LFN50 at factormeals.com/LFN50 to get 50% off your first box plus 20% off your next month while your subscription is active.
Right, it's the last segment of the show. So, of course, we brought on the LCS cast that joke, whatever. No, actually, first of all, I did actually talk to him just a second ago while we were just setting this up. There was actually a rumor a few years back, apparently he even spoke about that he was going to work on the LCK once here, Cubby. So I will say that means he does, in theory, watch Asian League of Legends, even though he did once make that tweet that he did deserve to go to The Hague for, where he said that JoJo and Inspired were a top 5 jungle duo in the world. But it's okay. That might have been shit posting. It might have been bad. It might have been homerism. You tell us. What was it? What was it?
Well, you know, as I just told you, Thorin, when you grow up as a lifelong Chicago sports fan, you got to have a little bit of Delulu in your system.
Right.
You know?
Okay. Right. I see. Fair enough. Okay.
Yeah. I mean, at least the Cubs won in your lifetime.
That is true. That was huge.
Yeah.
Obviously, like part of my namesake comes from that because yeah. So my grandpa, he actually worked for WGN. He was in radio on air for 64 years for WGN.
Oh, cool.
So he's in the Radio Hall of Fame. The only person that has a longer tenure than him on the same network is actually Vin Scully.
Oh wow!
So,
okay.
I'm so scared. Is this story going to be that he like died a year before they won or something? What's the
no? He saw it, and he called me afterwards.
Goodness,
and that was a good memory. That was a very good memory. So yeah.
Okay.
Right.
That's anyway,
fantastic.
I will say, luckily, this is somewhat virgin territory, not just because of our fan base.
Yeah?
Somewhat virgin territory because we haven't talked about LCS at all. But spoiler, we haven't even mentioned an LCS player in this conversation. Like, not a single one of any of the guests. We didn't even accidentally veer into it and mention one. So we're just starting out fresh here. So here's the problem, right? Which is, if you notice in a lot of the regions, you have had a lot of the big narratives get collapsed right at the end of summer. So obviously, GenGs and the Golden Road, right? I have to say, this has to be the angle when we start on the LCS with Team Liquid, because Team Liquid has had this story. I pointed out after the LCS, it wasn't just LCS. Like, look, obviously on paper, they were supposed to win that finals and then come in big form. But actually, they've done this at all the tournaments, like MSI and EWC, both times. It's like, we almost beat T1. It's like, yeah, but almost. You know, yeah, you're right. Spiritually, you sort of were about to win morally, but you didn't. So here's the question I have for you is, do you actually still ride the TL train? Are we supposed to get hyped? Are we supposed to believe, for example, they're going to be a top 8, or they could? I mean, it's best of 3 in the Swiss. Can they upset like an Asian team or something? What are your expectations for TL?
Yeah, I mean, I think my baseline, like for the tournament, is I think the expectation should be that one Western team like makes it to quarters. I feel like that's reasonable. With the strength of the 3 teams.
I also say as well, I mean, I saw someone run the numbers on Reddit, but it's also true that another reason why there should always be a chance for at least one is because you can also get like the NRG one last. There's nearly always one team, if you run the numbers, basically gets one insane. One team gets a really, really bad one, and one team gets an insanely good one. So maybe if they get the path where you get Fnatic, and you know what I mean, like 4 or 5 teams where you only have to play maybe one Asian team is doable. But I mean, in general, though, I actually think surely TL's in the convo with G2. Yeah. For they could do that even without the lock, right? Surely they could actually maybe win these teams in a best of 3.
No, I think that like TL showed, at least in facing T1, that they can play map in a way that does match some of the best teams. And I think that for me, the interesting part about TL coming into this tournament is I feel like a lot of the edge that TL did have was they were good at playing the swaps and also swapping around second gloves really early on. Now, swaps are still going to exist, but I think a lot of the teams have really caught up in that meta. So, like, if I'm on the TL, Hopium now, it's actually that I feel like the meta swap should really help Umti and his, like, wheelhouse of champs. Like, this last split, for me, with all the AP junglers being meta, TL really ignored them for the vast majority of the split, which I found was really interesting because, A, they're almost playing a counter meta in LCS by really heavily prioritizing early in the split the Sejuani and the Malakais when everyone was playing the Zyras and eventually the brands that were big in the meta. But that did really help TL play this fast style where they could go for the early dives, early swaps, and then blow you out of the water like in the first 10 minutes that they had a good map. So I feel like now most teams should be playing that meta with how big champs I expect like J4 to be. But that should really fit Umti, who like that is his wheelhouse, right? He wants to play shit that's fast and get things going.
Like Lee Sin and Jarvan, should be very helpful. I agree with that. Look, man, I'm concerned though, because like if you think about the mid champion pool, we're definitely drifting away because the Ziggs nerfs are pretty substantial, I would say, to the way that pro teams like to fast push with Ziggs. I still think probably APA plays Ziggs at this event just because he is a specialist, and like I don't think it's completely useless right now. Yeah. But I mean, I'm concerned because Talia, who is kind of a fringe meta pick across regions throughout playoffs, I don't know how much we're going to see that, coming in. So what is I mean, APA has been kind of good at Ari at times, I would say. So maybe that's something that he can revert to.
Yeah.
But I would say even in the playoffs, right, his individual performance in the finals versus FlyQuest wasn't super inspiring. And the swaps were a massive part of their identity. They were exploiting the fact that T1 was kind of bad at swaps and TL was good at swaps. And like they figured out a way to be world-class macro through things that they could control, which was studying swaps and being able to outplay Asian teams on that. And I just don't know if that's going to be the same type of situation that we are going to deal with when it comes to international play. So maybe the wind is kind of out of Team Liquid's sails in some areas.
Yeah, I mean, I'm with you on that. Like, I feel like a lot of teams have caught up. I mean, I was like sitting on my high horse, like out here, like wild, like, putting your bot lane in the mid early before second grubs, like that makes so much sense. Just gives you the ability to play each side instead of playing top. I think that one of the ways that TL was really good at getting APA ahead is that they just send him bot when grubs spawn too. So like, hey, you have a TP, you can still play it. But I thought they were really also really good at abusing like melee champions being in mid, like playing into a Yone. They would overload that lane and just deny that character resources, funnel APA. Then all of a sudden, your Corki's up a level or two on Yone. He can't really do anything in the mid game. I think that is what I expect TL to run. Yone is a champ that I think a lot of people expect to be high presence. He seems really strong in this patch. TL for me is the team that I think they're going to let a champ like that through and try and emulate that strategy in this tournament. But I am kind of with you, and I feel like some of the magic, like a lot of people are like, wow, TL's really good at swaps. And then people actually started looking at TL VODs, figured out how to swap like them. And I think some of their edge coming into this tournament is actually gone. So I do agree with you, but I still feel like the baseline of this team is like if they get leads, they can convert them into wins. It's just how many leads can they convert. And I agree with you on APA's champion pool too. I've been covering APA since he was playing like amateur in 2020. I started casting post-COVID. And he had to pick up a lot of champions in his time because he was a Acel Talia Kled player in solo queue. Orianna was one of the first champions that he picked up. I think he'll be okay on Orianna, but like there are just so many sick Oriannas in this tournament because I mean, obviously just being a staple champion of mid. I wouldn't rank APA as like an insane Ori or an insane Syndra. These are champions that he did pick up earlier on, but I feel like he actually did legit have edge on marksman because he's always been a Tristana player. And that really transitioned well to some of the other champs that he was able to pick up because he was quite good at the Corki Tristana. So I'm wondering what happens with TL and with that pool. I could definitely see them still trying to force some of those champions in, if that's possible. But I'm curious what they end up playing in this tournament because I feel like as much as a meta buff as it is for Umti, I don't know how APA is going to respond to that.
And Yun, I mean, Yun is a player, like, I think the big story of this year was like, oh, APA and Yun, they went to the boot camp at MSI and they got so much better. And like, they did legitimately have good international performances. But honestly, like, I think we can say Masu outplayed Yun in the playoffs. And like, is there a concern for you about Yun's current form? Because that really hasn't been up to the same level that we've come to experience.
Don't you think, Monty, that the meta has sort of like abandoned him though? Like he was really good on certain champions, and then as some of those have gone out, it seems like his level dipped a bit.
Well, I think like he has been good on the Ezreal, but a lot of his fallback champions have been champions like Varus, right? And it seems like sometimes they try and shoehorn the Varus in where it, maybe it shouldn't be. And so I think the question becomes like if he has to play a bunch of Jinx. I mean, he's had good Jinx games in the past, not to take that away from him, but if Jhin is like the number one pick, like, is he a great Jhin player? Is it, the question is TL as a team a Jhin team? Because Umti doesn't want to play, carry jungles a lot of the time. Impact can play carry top lanes. Like, certainly he's a great Rumble player, but he's not the consummate, like, carry top lane player. He is the consummate weak side player. So the onus has to be on APA and Yun to a certain degree to carry this team. And are they really, like, international caliber carry players? Do they have the versatility to do that?
It's year 2 for these guys. So, in a sense, like, I mean, we'll find out. I feel like Yon, again, pound for pound, as you highlighted, like MSI EWC was fine. Varus, I think, is still actually going to be playable, especially if it's going to be a lot of Jhin meta, because you can, at least with Varus, like, the poke build got nerfed on this patch, but it still was getting played. I covered the Americas Challengers event. Obviously, like, that's tier 2, but So like some of the picks in there, like I assume are just gonna be gone because like the best teams will find a way to beat them. But Varus ended up being really high priority by the back half of that tournament, which I found interesting.
You have more experience on this patch for sure.
Yeah, I just found that interesting because I wasn't expecting that with it being nerfed. Like it was big on 17, but I was surprised that it was as big as it was on 18. It was fearless too, so like that helped. But they were playing it as answers in the Ziggs, which was interesting. So I have a lot of faith in Yawn if it ends up being something like Varus Callista. As you highlighted as Ezreal, like that was his go-to champion from day one. I think his Kais is good. Historically, he wants to play Aphelios in the Jinx rather than a Jinx itself, but I think Aphelios is pretty dead. So I'm interested again. I would actually have a lot of faith if it ends up being any sort of Callista meta. I think that Yawn plays that pick really well, and then freeing up Core. Core's been having a really, really good year. Just having him have an extra tool to be aggressive with. Sure. I think that could be a winning formula for TL because I agree with you. I think the other interesting thing about that team, we talked about how they played APA and swaps. My diagnosis at TL was that a lot of LCS was Renekton and Cassante. And one of the reasons why Impact was our hands down MVP. Impact was sick. I thought top lane competition was down this split. He was also willing to play every single answer into Renekton and Cassante. Like a lot of teams weren't willing to pull out the Kennen, the Ornn. He was pulling those out earlier on. The GP, yeah. Cassante willing to play the Mordekaiser. He doesn't play the Olaf matchup, which can be good. Doesn't play the Gwen, but that doesn't really fit their team. They want to play fast and be kind of someone that can create space for APA and Yawn. And then his Cassante was probably the best. It was the best we had in the league, right? So I thought it was really valuable that he was able to play that circle of champs, like the counters around the two champs to really define the LCS meta. And I do expect the top lane meta to be pretty similar to that. So that could be a real positive. And I'm looking forward to see Impact get tested because like Bwipo really did not show up until playoffs. So Impact was just kind of like beasting everyone this split. And I'm kind of curious to see where he falls in the pool because this was an awesome split for Impact. And I've always felt like he just never gets the credit he deserves simply because he plays in NA, even though this guy's been sick for 10 years, right?
What do you read into FlyQuest like glow up because they were clearly the underdog coming into the playoffs and especially the finals, but they actually performed really well. And you know the way I've always looked at this iteration of the FlyQuest roster is that if you actually can have a day where the side lanes both decide to play well, this is an extremely good team because Inspired has constantly this year just been doing triage for the side lanes. It's like Bwipo fucks up early or Masu Buzio fucks up early, and it completely destroys Inspired's early game. He has to go deal with the problem. And sometimes they still win those games, but it has been like a lot of unforced errors from FlyQuest that have made them shaky. And it felt like now that they have a more solid mid laner and quad this split in summer, and you get a playoff run where you actually get to see Busio, not choking basically, and Masu continuing to play well as sure, Bwipo is still inconsistent, but he was a better performer in these playoffs than he has been at other points in the year. Now we have a FlyQuest team that can actually play through jungle mid and be very good.
Yeah, I'm curious because I feel like when FlyQuest are at their best, obviously consistency in sides, it was an issue. But for me, it's funny because it was the same thing in spring as it was in summer. I really like when they overload sides in the mid game. I feel like they have a really good read when they go attack a side lane by putting their solo laners there or just having the Kaiser follow up, make a play. Ash Arrow
is very important for their run.
It's what they're legitimately good at this. I think the best thing for them, Masu is high key really good on these utility ADs, for being so early on in his career. I mean, I find it ridiculous. It's this fifth guy split playing competitively, as a whole. The come up this guy's had, how fast he's ramped up into the player that he can be. Really solid team fighter, always has been. How he's evolved though to really round out his play. He's getting better at lane. I don't think he's going to be a great laner by any means at this tournament, but I think he'll make up for it in the fights as he really has always done. I feel like this wheelhouse, if it ends up being an Ashe, Jhin, Poke, Varus, Ziggs meta, that really feels like Masu can play well into that. I'm worried though because I feel like as good as it is for Quad / Solka to have some Syndra Ori in the mid lane, I know Inspire can play anything and everything well, but I feel like him being on a carry was really big for this team at times. He was really willing to play stuff like Brand. The Ivern was probably the thing that kind of defined their run the most, but he was playing that to neutralize them. The fact that he could play that and then also go to and have some carry games in a best of series was really big. And I don't think he's going to have that opportunity as much unless he's blowing up early games, right? because like the champs that I expect to be meta in jungle are just going to fall off and not be as effective later on. So I think that, having the Inspired be a carry for this team and having him be the reliable, we're going to be doing the damage later on in the fights was actually pretty big for FlyQuest. And I'm curious to see how they respond to that, like in this tournament, because I feel like that could kind of take away an element of power from them, just the fact that they do have a jungler that can match like the carries of anyone again this tournament, right? So yeah.
I mean, my concern is just like NA doesn't penalize FlyQuest for having side lane mistakes as hard. I mean, the snowball that some of these Asian teams, like if Whippo randomly dies in the early game, like the game will be
over. Bin, the game's over. Yeah.
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 So, I mean, that's my concern is like as good as a player as Inspired is, and as well as Whippo can kind of bounce back in some scenarios in North America, it really feels like, Masu and Busio being young players who can be punished, or Whippo, being overly aggressive, making mistakes. Those snowballs are very, very severe against good Asian teams.
Yeah. The hope for me is that kind of like what we saw with like Fnatic and MSI. I don't think that FlyQuest is going to play similar comps to them, but they're playing stuff like Camille Talia, so you could play the side lanes really fast and like still have windows to make plays even when they were down, and that saved them a few games. I'm wondering if we see something like that from FlyQuest, just kind of commit to, hey, we're going to try and play sides. I think that is the one thing they do really well. And the fact that they at least like to play two sides of them or two lanes of the map and like overload, I feel like can help from playing from behind. But I'm with you in the sense that like they are not the team that like, they're not like TL in the sense that, hey, if we get a lead, we can play the map well enough to win for the next 20 minutes and we're going to put the game away, right? FlyQuest are going to make mistakes, and against the best teams in the world, like, yeah, I mean, they're going to cash that in way more than the NA teams that we had. So yeah, that is a very fair concern. My hope is, as someone that had FlyQuest winning the split at the start of the split, which not many people had, I felt like Masu and Busio could continue to scale, and that Quad fit this team just so much better than Jensen in terms of he's just a better laner.
You would have known, right? Because you cast tier 2. So what was your take on like Quad entering the LCS? Because it seemed like a pretty big, not that Jensen did not play well in spring, right?
Yeah.
But, Quad, he's a kind of unknown Korean player who I know I don't watch tier 2 NA, so I just knew people said he was excelling and like he was dominating in that scene, but you seem to have a lot of confidence in him.
No, he was a beast. I've never heard. I had a couple like funny stories from this. So there were every mid just wanted to play against Quad in the league, right? It's like, oh my god, this guy's got like 80 LCK games, like beat Faker, right? So like if I can take him down, like I can make it, right? And Quad was owning everyone because that team was 30 in Quad, and like 2/3 of their game in the split, the game was over by like wave 5 because one of those two like had a solo kill or like Shaden would come to the lane and the game was just over, right? The other thing like about Quad was that I know a big part of him was that he had stage fright, I guess, in like LCK, or like he was always a better scrim player than a stage player. So I know that like FlyQuest just kind of like, hey, you're the best player in this league, go make plays. And frankly, like in the second half of the split, he kind of griefed at times because he was just overplaying his hand. But I do think it actually helped him really build up some confidence in order to perform on a bigger stage, because I've never seen a moment like an LCS outside of the first 2 weeks where like he looked like he was nervous, right? Also his English.
I do think just like in general though, that Western teams are better at unlocking that potential of players, because really I think in Korea or China, if you are not performing on the stage, they just get rid of you and get the next guy coming up, right? Whereas I think, trying to do mental performance coaching is much more of a Western thing than an Eastern thing. So it seems like it might have been a good switch for him potentially.
That's an interesting read, actually, with like the fact that the more pressures in there can help. It definitely helps him. I mean, like this is the best I've seen Quad play, right? And like I saw him in the LCK days. I mean, he wasn't really flattering there, but he's actually good here. And we might like, if Nico for whatever reason ends up being blinded, he will play Cassio into it. So that's the hope. You can get the Cassio at Worlds. His Cassio obviously very sick and well renowned across the world. But yeah, no, it was really funny like seeing the players be like, oh my god, this guy's got 80 plus games to LCK. If I can beat him, like I can make it. No one touched this guy. Like for the record, like the best mid we have right now in Challengers League is a Blazolve that like has like any barometer of like where things are at. Like it's not great. We get 2 rookies coming up, like I'm kind of excited about, but need more time. But yeah, like Quad just owned everyone. It was pretty funny.
I feel like the mistake people make when they see these people were like bottom LCK players is they ignore that. Obviously, it's not a 1v1 game. What about their teammates? Like, bro, I think you can even do this for some of the players who are now at the top of the LCK. Like, where the fuck was everyone telling me how good Delight was before he got onto fucking GenG? Where were you all at? Because, by the way, he looks unbelievable these last 2 years. But I'll bet when you have shit teammates, you just don't look as good, do you? Like, because remember, if you're quad, even if you're like talent-wise as good as the other mid laner, maybe his jungler's like Peanut or Canyon or something, and your jungler is insert a random name, you know what I mean? Like, it's going to make it way harder to be good.
That is a really funny mirror, actually, between the TL and FlyQuest, like the spring and summer split. The fact that, for me, like in spring, FlyQuest was favored to win that final.
Yes.
They beat TL upper bracket 3-2, lost in final 3-1, and then wins like in his first split of LCS after being the journeyman LCK player. Same thing happened for FlyQuest and Quad, right? The 3-2 loss in upper bracket, upset win 3-1, and then Quad gets it. It was kind of actually a fun, mirror that we had in LCS this year.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And by the way, I mean, obviously people saw that mad Reddit thread where he like won every game in a US solo queue or whatever. But the other thing is the actual mechanics in Quad look really fucking strong, man. I actually am quite interested to see what he'll do at this Worlds. Like, think of some of the picks that are going to be available, some really strong picks out there for mid lane. So he has a chance to win some BO1s over people, surely.
I mean, honestly, I'm really happy for him. Like, I know that like stepping in, like it's hard to learn a new culture. He picked up English really fast. FlyQuest like always said, man, this guy works his ass off. Not all the NACL players are on their they're in their facility. Quad was, and so they were able to kind of be more hands on, and that really paid off. But I mean, think of his career. Like, when was he ever known for marksman? Like, his smolder was really good. It started drawing bans by the end. He was able to play like all the marksman circles. He was winning both sides of the Triss Corki matchup when that was big. Like, yeah, I mean, like at times he was legit. He was the best man in playoffs. He was a huge part of the reason that FlyQuest ended up winning. So I'm really hoping he can kind of continue with some of this form. It feels like him and Inspired are pretty in sync. And if it ends up being like really mid jungle defined, then they're not going to topple to like some of the teams, right? I mean, obviously, Canyon Chovy are going to be pretty good against the field, but like. I mean, against like the non-tier 1 teams, I do feel like the mid-jungle FlyQuest can take it into anyone. So,
by the way, on the Inspired angle, I'll even throw this out there as well. Normally, everyone will mock players who are like seem delusional and they're overly confident. He's confident though in a way that I've talked to him privately. So it's real. Yeah. Like, he isn't just doing it for the camera like Doublelift used to. Like, hey, I could be anyone. Then you could tell like he was fucking pepper sweating if he faced Uzi Eye. Like, I actually think, no joke, guys, that Inspired for real actually think there might only be like 3 better junglers in the whole world or something. You know, like I think he'll give it to like Canyon and I think it's a handful he'll give it to. But I actually think maybe he even just says his teammates or whatever. But I think if you put him against those other players, I think he thinks he can beat them. I think if you ask him, can he beat Wei and fucking lose? He'd say yes, of course, instantly. Give me the fucking teammates. Let me roll. Yeah.
It's interesting because like I've known like APA like for a long time. So like I always knew like when he was coming up, like he talks to keep himself accountable. Like that's something like he does to be like, hey, like if I'm gonna play at this level, like I'm gonna talk, I'm gonna add that extra pressure to myself, and like it's gonna help me perform, right? Whereas Inspired, I feel like he's like a realist, like to help himself. He's like, nah, you know what? Like I may not be better than that guy, but like he's always confident. Like there's never like a time where he talks where he's not confident. Like even when he's like kind of like he's had interviews where like he's pretty critical of like himself and his team. I'm never like, yeah, like that's outlandish. It's like, no, like he's kind of right about that. Like that's how the game's played out. And like as long as it's like being handled okay, and it does seem like FlyQuest, for all the flack they got from the community for like whatever their team and environment looks like, it looked pretty good throughout that playoff run, right? I really feel like
I'll also say if you think about how things age, as Gen Alpha says, Cubby, I'll tell you what, arguing a lot with Jensen and Whippo doesn't suddenly seem like that crazy a scenario to find yourself in, does it? Now that we know what they might actually say and think in public. If someone say, a lot of people might argue with someone like Whippo if they were to get into a tete-a-tete, as it were, you know. I don't know, I think that's aged pretty well, mate. Like, if you combine it with how they won the playoffs, Inspired looks fucking amazing right now. His stock is its absolute highest value ever, surely.
Yeah, I that's crazy to think too, because I feel like ever since he came in at Rogue, and with how young he's still 22.
Oh yeah,
right? That's crazy, man. Like the head this guy has on his shoulders.
In Europe, and he was only something like 20 at the time when he left. Like he got MVP Worlds every year, and they wrote him off as like he's never going to be good. And he chokes forever. It's mad.
Yeah, I mean, talk about stocks that age well. Him versus Larson too. I mean, that's a funny one as well. But no, I Inspired like to say that his stock's the highest it's ever been. I mean, like for me, I've always rated him really highly. So yeah, I mean, good for Inspired, right?
We should talk about 100 Thieves just a little bit because obviously people did not expect them to defeat Cloud9.
I would say they shouldn't have money. In fact, that someone is me. I still don't believe it. And I still don't believe almost any of the players are good. So
let's just say, 100 Thieves, Spring Splits. Okay, they're pretty fraudulent. Like they have a good record, but they have no macro game. They still play pretty badly in summer. Sniper doesn't know how to use TP, right? They get Tomo instead because we have just a mental boom on 100 Thieves. So they're running with Tomo and Ayla, which to say is on paper not a spectacular bot lane.
One might say it's a Challengers League bot lane, Monty. I might be used to it, but hey, they made the run.
So River and Quid were obviously, the talked about players in spring, with Quid winning MVP and then, them having a pretty mediocre split. But to 100 Thieves' credit, they did play a lot better in playoffs. Like this isn't a thing where Cloud9 certainly collapsed. Yeah.
Here's what already pops the whole Quid narrative. The MVP, he's actually won MVP, bro. That's going to go along with the Arrow one if I don't give a fuck about those MVPs. But anyway, here's why I will say already the Quid thing didn't live up to the hype. He's not even the best Korean mid laner whose name has Q, U, and ends in a, see what I did there? Ends with the D. He isn't even the best at that. So I did that cleverly because obviously there's only one, but he isn't. Quad is better than Quid. So I'm just going to put that out there. So since he was supposed to be the carry of this team, that's a bit of a bad news already. That we're already downplaying the mid. So come on. What is the angle I'm supposed to get hyped on this team? Give me it.
I mean, we've talked about meta a lot. Like it's like it's going to be a big meta shift. The meta shift helps this team the most out of all the NA teams. Okay. I like playing with River plus Quid. If they can play fast mid jungle duos,
Jarvan is very famously a River champion.
Yeah, I think of all the. I mean, even Poppy, like his Poppy is really good. I think that's one thing. Like we haven't mentioned Poppy. I think all three junglers coming are decent at Poppy because I expect that pick to be flexed around just a little bit.
Yeah, it's very powerful in support and solo queue right now.
Yeah, so I like that champ just counters like a lot of the meta, right? So I actually have hope for 100 Thieves for, I mean, at least making it to the Swiss stage, which I think should be the expectation for this team, just given how young they are and how probably not they shouldn't be here. As NA fans, we like to make fun of Mad Lions sub 50% win rate making worlds. 100 Thieves, same thing in summer, sub 50% win rate, but NA was a really top-heavy region this year with, I mean, the entire split was like, okay, TL, FlyQuest, and C9 are the three best teams. Let's see what order they're the three best teams in when they actually face each other in the back half of the split. And then it was like the last couple weeks, C9 just played the stupidest meta of all time and got beat by 100 Thieves, right? So I think that 100 Thieves, like...
Cloud9's still confused that Maokai exists, even though Blabber has like a 90% win rate on the champion for some reason.
Yeah, they were so used to playing it that JoJo just forgot like how Maokai interacts with the block and like completely fucks that champion, So yeah, I do think that like at least 400 Thieves. I mean, Metal Wheel Hall should be okay. If the bot lane's not good, at least the utility ADs, like hey, if lane phase doesn't go fantastic, I can get a few skill shots at fights. It might be okay. I mean that's like the super cope angle, right? I think that the ADs in this tournament are stacked. I mean, even in like the play-in stage, like if 100 Thieves don't win out, you might have to face someone like Shogun on the other side of the bracket, who like he's a pretty decent player over there. I don't take the 100 Thieves bot lane in the Shogun and Bay. So it's something where we're gonna have to see. I mean, how much this team grows. I do think that the one thing that might be good for 100 Thieves, at least in play-ins, is that this team loves to fight. They're bloody.
I mean, I'm low-key looking forward to the Sniper versus Summit
yes.
top lane match. It's actually kind of a banger for play-ins to have those players going against each other.
Yeah. I mean, I'm excited to see Sniper here. Like he's a player where honestly, coming out of Challengers League, I didn't rate Sniper that highly. Like the players that I was excited for going into this year were Masu and Meech, right? I had Masu as the top guy. I thought Meech was actually a decent AD, and he just didn't pan out nearly as well. But I had Sniper, like, I mean, he had really high highs and some low lows, but I feel like he has improved a lot. And playing that role like as a rookie, man, like that's hard. You're playing up against Impact, like the amount of game knowledge gap you have. I don't care how good your hands are. I mean, it's really tough in top lane because any mistake you make as a solo long lane, like your game's doomed. And we saw that a lot for Sniper, where he would make mistakes and doom the game. Other times he'd flip the game, win, and end up carrying. Like his Jax is really good. Jax getting buffed is really, really good for 100 Thieves. Sniper's willing to play Jax in a lot of the matchups, especially the Renekton one, right? So I actually think this patch helped 100 Thieves the most. And I am pretty confident in them making it in the Swiss stage. My one concern is that if they fuck up, the other side of the bracket in Swiss, I rate a lot higher than the one that 100 Thieves is on. So like facing a team from there could be trouble, right?
I mean, I just think it's funny that like Sniper was 6 years old when Impact won Worlds.
It is pretty funny. That guy,
considering Impact is the current MVP of the league they play in. When you say that's pretty baller.
That's like a LeBron stat. You know, like you got like guys in the court like, you play with my dad. It's like, really? Yeah.
It's pretty good. It's pretty good. But I mean, Sniper's still only 17, so like obviously we don't expect him to have.
That's insane. I wasn't aware he was that young.
Yeah, he's really young.
Yeah, it's first year.
It's first year, and he came into the league like in his first year of eligibility. So the fact that he has the mechanics that he does, and then he's making the lane plays that he does. Hopefully,
here's the thing, Sniper. I've got a tip for you from another teenager that entered the league and was a sensation. If you just buy an alarm clock, you know those really old ones from the 80s, where it's just like it's that really red, like it's the red LEDs. You know what, Monty? That just looks like that, and then it goes. You'll definitely have to get up. So just like Jojo Pion, if you just do that, Sniper, you'll be able, when you get to the big leagues, you'll be able to stay on the top team.
Put it on the other side of the room. Yeah. Gotta get out of the bed, turn it off.
Exactly. He knows all the tricks. That's how you do it. Exactly. Yeah. Yes.
So I made this,
Yeah.
You can even buy two and just have a backup one and set them for 10 minutes, different time periods. Put them on opposite sides.
You can't do any of that. Even if you make $700,000, if you're just late, you're late. What can you do? What can I do?
Yeah. One thing I do think is actually like kind of cool about this Worlds is, at least like from an NA perspective, like a lot of the players that like all three teams feature players that did come up from Challengers League, right? But also the coaches in Spawn and Golden Glue as well. Sure. I'm sure you guys have like talked a lot about Spawn. It's pretty clear to see like the impact he's had on that TL roster. But I will say that like with both him and Golden Glue, they were both coaches in Challengers League, and it's really cool for me seeing them at the highest level, like really have the identity.
I hope you get promoted soon too, Cubby. I hope you get promoted.
Thank you, man. It's very nice of you, but it's a bit of a stopgap.
I hope you join though.
Them soon. Yeah. Well, I'm sending all the kids off
Have you considered switching to play-by-play so that Azale doesn't have to do it for playoff matches?
oh boy. So we've got
anyway, continue.
we got Golden Glue and Spawn. Like their teams, they had a similar identity in Challengers. Like Golden Glue was coaching like the Tenacities, the Kenvies, like they were supposed to come up and be big, and they would just kind of like always let those guys ball. And then TL was like the very strict macro team in Challengers, and like would beat teams like with their map. So the fact that like at least their team identities have come through in like multiple different like teams of players and levels, I do think it actually speaks really highly to those guys, like how they're able to lead teams, because it's really hard to like see the impact of coaching, obviously, in League, but it is like one way that like, I can at least measure success is, hey, like if I see commonalities between different groups of players, it at least shows like you're somewhat effective, right? In fact, they've done that like at now 2 different levels and both made Worlds in their first year. Like I do think highly of these guys, that they can lead young men, and it is cool to see them like have their teams grow and have their identity actually show on their players. So I'm hoping that like each guy's find success, and some of that identity can be seen at Worlds at least too, and hopefully in a good way. Sometimes 100 Thieves they fight a little bit too much, it's fun.
Yeah, I know this doesn't have anything to do with Worlds, but I do think it's valuable to get your perspective here on the tier 2 changes that have been announced for America. And you bring up some good points, which is that recently LCS has been promoting some pretty successful rookie players and coaches, and that they put on very good performances at an international level. Like you would not have thought that the combo of Spawn, Yun, and APA with this version of Team Liquid would have done what they have done internationally this year and been so strong, right? That has been a real testament to the development within this region. So what do you make of the changes that have been made for tier 2, particularly with teams like FlyQuest that have announced that they've released all their academy players? Because presumably now with the new system of the guest slots, like it's not, FlyQuest and Team Liquid and these teams that have had academy rosters are not necessarily incentivized any longer to have them because they can't actually, they can't compete for the promotion relegation-esque system.
Yeah. I have a few things. First off, like props to Spawn. Like he picked his guys, or like had say, like he stuck with the guys he worked with in challengers and like made them, help.
Yeah,
make
we'll
them
see if
good,
that's
so
a great
cool.
long-term strategy or not, but it's working right now.
Yeah, I mean, it's nice for them to say like, hey, these guys should be gone. The community looking at you on an APA, and for them to be doing well is nice. In terms of the changes, I specifically on the no tier like tier 1 teams having tier 2 teams, like looking at that long term, and especially colleges as well. I actually feel like that's a lot of the future because like the funding went way down, right? Like once the academy got nuked, like these players, like the best contract you're gonna get is like 4 or 5K a month, which I mean you're still able to play League like doing that, but I mean it's not like you're getting a full-time, California state minimum salary, which was the academy minimum beforehand, right?
Right.
The strongest team that we had between both splits this year was actually Maryville University. And I think a huge part of that was the fact that they had those people in person. I mean, I used to coach like my collegiate team, right? We were mid-master. Like I took players on campus, like we'd start the split like Plat 2 with some. We were able to take a game off Maryville like 2 years in a row. I coached with Hatham, who's actually now the head of data for TL2. Like coaching remotely versus in person, like when we got our spot, I mean, the difference of just the impact you can have, it's astronomical. And I really feel like if you want to actually invest in people to play at tier 1, you have to have like hands-on in the same environment, grow together, just the intrinsic motivation of seeing your peers next to you playing the game and talking about it. It's just, it's such a bigger impact than sitting at home and trying to grind this out on your own, right? Just the social aspects. So I feel like the changes made really disincentivize that. And because the wages went down, we do have an influx of like colleges and like places that actually take in these NACL players or aspiring.
Right, it's viable to go there now
on scholarships.
Right.
And that's like going to be like those scholarships. Like if you think about a college, you might only have like 10, 15 full rides to give out. They're going to the league players right now. That's not going to continue in the future, especially if they make this change. So I am actually like a bit concerned about that in particular. In terms of like Americas and like the cross-pollination between...
By the way, that part was actually underrated as well, Cubby. Even though, look, the main problem was obviously collegiate level was nowhere near LCS level. So it wasn't like the traditional sports path in America.
Yeah.
You will go from that team to the LCS. But that was an underrated part. People ignore that. If you get the scholarship, that could be like hundreds of thousands of dollars that you don't have to pay to go to college. By the way, that means even if you then don't make it as a pro, you then have a fucking degree, but it's free. Like, that's actually mad underrated if you think about all the people complain about college fees. Yeah, that's actually a legit angle.
And I mean, like a lot of the kids now are smart enough to recognize that, which is great.
That's
and
cool.
Also, like, I mean, when I started casting in 2020, we had Maryville. They were right outside of like making it for scouting grounds. Like they were the 3rd or 4th best team that we had like at a tier 3 level. Now, like they were the best team we had at a tier 2 level. So it kind of shows like it was props to them like how their systems changed, but also like being able to attract better players because the fact that they do give out full ride scholarships to more than just the 5 guys like that are starting on the league roster. It does show like a lot of it has shifted towards college, and like we did have a second college team in the tier 2 league. So I feel like the fact that like they aren't incentivized to include colleges, for me, that was the big miss. In terms of cross-pollination and like the promo relegation, I think it just gives more people like reasons to be fans, which is great. And I know that like a lot of the big influence for Riot is just the fact like, hey, we're downsizing the amount of teams and regions we have across the world, but it like that's the main motivation, and that does suck. But at least with the new format being created, like I have a reason now to root for the team that like might be on the a line of relegation. Like, does that suck for an org? Yeah, but as a fan, like I might actually root for an Immortals moving forward because I might want to see them in the league, right? Because like there's 1 or 2 players I like. Whereas like when Immortals just sucks, I have no reason to root for them because like they're just gone. I don't see them play anymore, and there's no stakes to it, right? So that and like the regions cross-pollinating is actually decent.
I mean, I do think it's actually cool that there could be a college in the Americas region, right, that could get promoted. Like that's actually relatively interesting because it also helps, those collegiate programs continue to exist and gain prestige in terms of esports. So it is unfortunate, because to your point about in person, the teams that are going to be it's either the colleges or teams like Team Liquid or FlyQuest who have maintained academy rosters who are going to be able to do the in-person stuff, right? That you think is so important. And I tend to agree with you. And with those teams potentially like not throwing their hat in the ring anymore, it may be harder. So like, does collegiate become the feeder? And there are a number of colleges in the States, Maryville being the primary one because they were the first. They've won the most titles in League of Legends. Yeah. I've been to Maryville. Like Clerky invited me to go there. So I, a number of years actually was there on the campus. I had a meeting with the president of the university because they are very all in on esports. And they've like made that a core pillar of their entire college at this point in time.
The university is like seeing a lot of growth in terms of enrollment, like graduation rates too, which it's more than just the esports program, but yeah, like they put it in like a lot of their pamphlets, like it's like in like their ads they run, like it's really big for them, which is wild. Because I mean, they're not even in like the like FBS, like the NCAA system, right? Like they're outside of the NCAA, which is kind of wild to think about. So.
Yeah, I mean, I think they were a small university that figured out that there was an angle that they could actually succeed at here, and they really took advantage of it.
They did. So when I was in college, I went to Miami, Ohio. I co-founded the first varsity esports program at a D1 school. We were, it was 2016. We were like the 9th in the nation. And the red tape, like we had to go through to like sell it to the university. It's ridiculous. I've talked to like a lot of the guys who were trying to do it at the Big Ten schools. It was outrageous. And like the way that we were able to sell it is like pretty much we took the trans-Pacific population, and then at our university, if you were an international student, well, we just so happen to have an easier English test, and if you come from China, you pay like $85K in tuition. So they saw that, and we're like, we can put this in pamphlets, and we're like, yes, you can, and that's how we got it. So, yeah.
That's clever. Yeah. By the way, a couple of points on the actual, obviously we only briefly touched on it, the whole like the fact that some of the top teams now all have academy players or the challenger players, sorry. And obviously the whole angle of now no one has academy teams anyway, and there isn't a challenger system overall. Like there's two things on that I want to, we can bounce on these if you want, they could just be statements. One would be, I actually think that in itself is a massive indictment of what LCS did in the last 5 to 8 years, which is, I think before people used money in exactly the wrong way. You know, I always make that joke, Monty, that to a fan who doesn't have millions of dollars, they will say silly sentences out loud like, well, this guy's a billionaire, so he could easily just throw like 20 million at this thing that's going to make no money. It's like, how do you think he became a billionaire? He didn't become a billionaire by throwing willy-nilly $20 million in a black hole. He actually probably did the opposite. And the joke is probably was way more like miserly with how he spent money than you or I would if we got $1,000, you know. So in the same way as they often make that mistake, I actually do think that people mistake having money for, this is easy now. I just pay all the money and that's how I get good players. Because I think if you look at NA the last 4 to 5 years, not the first period of LCS, which was a massive region with the potential to also not only make you a millionaire, but make you a famous person in streaming, and you can join these giant orgs. I think there were so many aspirational reasons to come that you used to be able to spend the money, but you got the value for it. You got like Piglet or some giant player, Bjergs and Jens. You got the absolute best players money could pay for. I think the last few years, they were still spending the millions, but they were doing stuff like getting the EU guy who they don't know, doesn't give a fuck this year. He's just going for the free money or the retirement party. You get the guy who never made it in Korea, but that's because he was just all right player, or he used to be good 2 years ago. I think they were wasting that money and thinking because they have all the zeros, it makes up for thinking. I think they've shown that old cliche, necessity is the mother of invention, because the second they didn't have those budgets anymore, bro, they're way better at the people they pick from Challenger. They don't just pick a guy like, I'm putting him in to discipline the other guy. They've had to actually go and scout who is good and then commit to that player. Because remember the one we all laughed at in spring? We all laughed at Double Lift from all those big statements because he sort of basically implied like, stupid Dodo could have had me. And it's like, they don't need you anymore, bro. You cost millions, and the young guy is not only probably as good now, if you look at how Double F was at the end, but he doesn't cost millions, and they've already worked with him. There's a million upsides. Well, the point is, if this was 3 years ago when the millions of dollars were still there, they would have just signed Double Lift, exactly because you'd turn your brain off. You'd see them in Double Lift and go, well, I've got to have him. Who the fuck's Yon? You would never go and do the actual thing that they must have done with Spawn of like, let's look at him. Could he play like this? How could he develop? I think that's a big deal. It's not just that we take academy players and challenge and put them up. We've actually like properly vetted them and picked the right ones, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's like a lot of like things and reasoning behind this. Like, I mean, first off, there were a couple individuals that like really helped build out multiple programs. So one would be like 100 Thieves back when they had like the 100 Thieves Next. It was
Papa.
Yeah, it was Papa, it was Empire, and Kelsey Moser.
Yep.
that crew then went to EG. They built out their third team, which had Danny and Surdy on it. Like Surdy's going to be LCS next year. If not, I'm going to throw a fucking fit. So like, I mean, the fact that like they were able to go through the ladder. Oh, Tomio was on there too. I mean, he wasn't a great LCS pro. Like that's a good, a good roster, right? The fact like you had individuals that had a scouting format to like find those players and then work with them. I think coaching had to come a long way. Like LCS teams, when franchising hit, were barely equipped to handle their main slot, let alone a second slot. And unironically, I think the change to not require them to have second slot is good. What did TSM do with their second slot last year? Or like in the last year where they could run it? They ran Haunter, Svensker, and a Wild Turtle and literally had no coach. Like, I don't care how experienced those guys are. You cannot equip a team with no coach to expect them like to be successful, right? They didn't give a shit about that spot. Imagine someone like actually gives a shit.
With no coaching, who's developing them? They don't just sit there and just
exactly. Yeah, it's like go have fun. Like then they like sort of like they started half of them like an LCS like for the end of the split. It's like what the hell is going on, you know? Sure. But yeah, I mean, I feel like tier 2 has just really suffered because of the mistakes of tier 1. Because as you were highlighting, they inflated salaries. That's a market entirely controlled by the owners. You can look at that and say, hey, I'm not going to pay that player. I'm going to pay to have an extra coach or two, actually like work with these players in the long haul. That's also a skill set that's like not valued. I mean, you brought the college, you know, comparison earlier and like how it's not doesn't apply to esports. Like, where are your people where it's like, I'm going to hire a coach like Coach K. We're going to specialize in dev because that's a different set of skills. How can we introduce you to competitive play? How can I get, you know, in his case, like he got to coach Team USA because like in college, you have to bring a group of guys together in like 6 to 8 months. And that's your season because like then they're going to leave the next year. Like that was what Team USA is, right?
Think how crazy this is that so many people in esports in NA come from a sports background or revere sports, but what they missed, what you just pointed out there, is the whole collegiate sports system in American football and basketball is based around the coach. It's always the coach that stays there for like Nick Saban and fucking Dean Smith and all these get John Wood. These guys are there for like 40 years, and the joke is like they themselves bring through talents, but they're the main guy. It's about them and their philosophy. Whereas actually, that's where no one did spend the money.
They also get paid more than professional coaches a lot of the time.
That is true.
I mean,
yeah, of course.
That is true. But also, like, look at Spawn. I mean, TL kept him, and like that's paid off. But the only way that you can be more successful as a coach is to actually go to the pro level. And I mean, a lot of times you're doing less coaching, like more management in that spot too, right? So I feel like that was like a real flaw at how teams like looked at things. And I mean, it might change moving forward. I do think that like C9 split, where they had like really high salaries and didn't have a ton of like a public support staff behind them. I feel like more teams might look at that and be like, okay, we're going to actually like, you know, try and bring down salaries more for players, try and have a man or two like behind the scenes, and hopefully that helps. I think that that's where things might be headed. But yeah, you look at the like a lot of the good pros, a lot of them came from like the early scouting grounds. Like I think it was like there was the draft class like Blabber, Palafox, Vulcan in it. That was the year before franchising. So they all hopped into franchising, and then everyone was like buyout locked. Like there was a lot of like rotation between LCS and Acad, like the different teams. Cause like you're just kind of like throwing contracts back and forth because they're like all too big. And you like there was a like couple years where like new players really did not actually promote or like actually break into the space. This is
something I wanted to also make a point about, which is the other reason why I didn't like the Challenger system, is I don't believe most of the teams used their Academy or Challenger team to develop talent. Like the worst thing is, as we referenced actually on this last Summoning Insight, or Four Horsemen we did, right? First of all, some teams, the top ones, used it as a really cynical contract prison, like you're saying, where like, here's a top talent. We all know he's a top talent, but I'm going to basically keep him. And one of you eventually is going to break and pay me this buyout. But until then, he just slaves away in my academy team, even though, by the way, I'm never putting him in my main team because I go to Worlds.
600k buyouts.
Yeah. And then secondly, as we're saying, I'm waiting because if I even wait one extra split, that's worth it to get 200k more, mate. I'll just wait until one of you does. But what that means instead, sadly, and this is a bizarre concept, it's counterintuitive to fans. It means that some of those players on the like 10th and 9th LCS teams that you didn't care about were actually worse than these fucking guys at the top of academy.
Yes.
We ended up with an insane scenario where the LCS team can't afford the LCS level player, and the top people just go, lol, I have them all. Who do you want? Jack was like Jack was the guy on the corner like, "Psst, hey kid, you want some fucking sick academy player?" And he opens his raincoat. He's got them all in there. He's got the fucking.
But they only come as a package.
Exactly.
Come as a package.
Here's the problem. You can have this really sick one, but you got to take the one with a dodgy leg off, man. It's package deal. Yeah, he was always doing some shit like in the bargain bin where, they have like Terminator 1, Alien, and then like, fucking some shit like movie that was a failed straight to video as the third one. It was like that every time. Yeah, true.
I mean, like there were splits where like I was looking at TLA when it was like the Harry, Yawn, like that team. Like I legitimately had them like 6th in LCS. I was like, if they played, like they're a borderline playoff team, right? Or like Tenacity and Kenvi, like they were promoted late into the system. And I think that like, I mean, Kenvi's confidence got nuked, which sucks. Tenacity, I feel like still could have played, even though like he just went through like the rookie top laner, was like, hey, you actually cannot play your carries. You got to play tanks, right? Like these guys were late to make it. And I do think that like if they had a better scenario, like they might have been able to like be a revenge story where like you're able to come up on a poor team and kind of like F1, right? You're gonna climb like which car you're in. It never really happened for a couple of these guys, and some of it like was delayed. So I like some of the system changing, like there are pros and cons. I feel like it has helped a lot of players just be accelerated because the money's not there and people are forced to moneyball. It's like, hey, like, maybe we do have to roll the dice on a JoJo Pion instead of like paying for a humanoid, which is what EG faced in that offseason. And they saved a ton of money and got a good player out of it, right? So it's like, I cannot believe that like people looked at that and was like, oh, like we're losing money in tier 2, right? It's not like we're paying a fifth of the salary for the same player, like by actually using the tier 2 slot the way it should be used, like in sports too, right? It's like, hey, I'm going to have my AAA baseball player come up. That's how the Cubs won in 16, to reference like something earlier on. The entire infield was all all-stars on rookie contracts. You get the moneyball the game, right?
Okay.
Yeah.
Love it. So, a very interesting conversation. I always want to get your take on it because obviously there's been a lot of upheaval and you are uniquely positioned in the middle of all of that. Yeah. Let's move it back to Worlds.
Yeah.
Who's going to win Worlds?
I obviously spent a split on LCK, and I've always watched LCK. I go back to.
Come on, hit it. Go on. I know
it's BLG. The
meta. He did all of that just to excuse himself for picking the LPL team. Listen, I love the Korean League and I love it. And you know what, Chovy, a cool guy, faker, legend. But yeah, fucking BLG, Chinese team all the way. There's not even Korean players on that team. So why is BLG winning?
The meta's too good for them, man.
Okay.
Like this patch for Knight, you have Syndra, you have Ahri, you have Orianna. You get to have utility bot lanes. Like I think On is so good coming into this tournament. Bin gets Jax buffed. It's the exact patch that Bin wants too. You just get to activate your lanes, and it's all okay. I mean, that's what this team's sick at. Their laners are so sick, and I think that they have all the champs they want on the patch. I do think this patch actually hurt GenG a bit. For me, GenG is at their best when Pays is on carries. And if it does end up going utility AD, I do think that hurts that team a bit. So I'm gonna favor BLG here. I think that I know you asked for dark horses though. This patch actually really helped Damwon. And I'm kind of hoping that Damwon can like make some sort of run with Showmaker.
The LeBlanc Syndra is definitely Silas is definitely good for Showmaker.
Also, Lucid gets Lee Sin back. He's a really good Lee Sin player.
That's a good point.
From Challengers, like has the Jarvan too. So if I were to pick a dark horse, I'd have to go with Damwon. But yeah.
That's bold picking the Moham and King. And
yes.
Hey, Rel is still meta, and Moham is a good Rel player.
It's not Doran Peanut.
That's where Monty, get ready. The joke is they'll just start Kellen and just fuck everyone's dreams again. I'm waiting for it.
I mean, it's not Doran Peanut. I cannot put my faith in them, as you guys have highlighted before. It's been too many worlds, man.
Yeah, but that's the problem. I have a sickness that goes the other way. Now, I will say it. Part of it has been is my brain is broken. Because I've followed esports history for so long, I know that in general, people are right. What you see is often true. So for example, if you see a player choke, oftentimes, except for the most exceptional players ever, they won't ever really get over it that much. Like they'll always have that in their DNA somewhere. Even if they win, it'll often be like a little bit tense, or there's times where they look like they could have crumbled. But the problem is when we're talking about the outliers in history, like the greatest players ever, which those people are in the category of, they're not just good players. It's not like those stories like, oh, maybe like Armut chalks a bit in that shit. Who gives a fuck about Armut? We're talking about people like Chovy who are like, you know, they have the skills to be the best ever, right? When it's those players, the problem is though, Cubby, even if you have to double down 15 times in a row, if they ever do make it at the end, oh, it's glorious, bro. Because you get to be the guy who looks like a genius, even though you actually picked, by the way, the equivalent of going, I think this Patrick Holmes guy might one day be the best. You know, it's easy now, isn't it? But I tell you what, you look like a genius if everyone kept going when he lost in those AFC titles. No, he hasn't got it though. He hasn't got this. If you get to then double down, it feels so awesome to finally win and have the best guy. So low key, that's why I can't give up on Peanut. I won't give up on Peanut.
Okay.
Look, man, I want Peanut to be.
Yes,
I'm the number one.
I hope he's
Peanut
good.
fan.
I do.
I would love nothing more than Peanut to, you know, path his way to World's Finals MVP.
Here's the sickest thing of all. One, we've also doubled our chances by splitting GenG into 2 teams. But technically, if we combine them all, we've got Knight on BLG, we've got Chovy on GenG, we've got Peanut on HLE, and then we've got Tarzan on Weibo. Monty, we've got 4 chances for one of these motherfuckers to actually win the thing and break this choking thing. Please, 4 chances. And if that doesn't work, I'm willing to break in half GenG and BLG again and go for 6 teams next year. So eventually we're going to get it done. Because by the way, that's the last thing to say, Cubby. That's the other thing people haven't stopped and thought about. And this is a real concept if you know the history of games like not only League in Korea, but also StarCraft, which is the other secret to finally getting the Kong, the guy who's the second place to win, just have him play another Kong in the final. What if it is GenG against Hannah in the final? Now one of them has to win. Now Peanut or Chovy has to win it. So all I need, that's why really low-key, that's the other reason secretly I just want BLG GenG final. Because then one of these motherfuckers has to win the World Championship. Finally, one of the streaks will be broken and there'll be a world champion. As
that'd be
long as
great.
Fake doesn't win, basically, I'm cool. That's it. Essentially, I'm not even cheering for players. I'm just cheering against Faker at this point in time.
I do have to explain the phrase Kong in this case because like that's like an OG esports term.
Yeah.
So the Kong line refers to the chain of silvers, second place finishes that Yellow had in StarCraft Brood War. So
Yes.
you call anybody. So Kong was his nickname because he was like bean. It means bean in Korean. And so we had the nickname Bean. So you call it the Kong line, which is basically like the player who is on the second place streak. So it was like Yellow, and then it was Stork after that.
That's cool.
Gangby, Fantasy, a whole bunch of them.
Yeah,
Because some of the ones at the end just only won their titles against each other. Stork won against like this guy, and then Fantasy won against. It was ridiculous. They all won against each other at the end, like I say. Also, by the way, if you don't know how insane the one for Yellow is, Monty, it's even worse than people know. He even said eventually that became like a thing, like synchronistically in his life that kept appearing. And one time, no joke, really late in his career, after he'd had this whole career, supposedly he actually got on a train, and the train ticket was like carriage 2, seat 22, and he was like. Oh my life. Yeah, it's like the universe was just telling him you don't get to be first ever, bro. I know it's mental.
Which is very funny, by the way, because that meme is now over 20 years old.
Yeah.
Yeah. The Kong line. So there you go, a little gem of esports history.
I did not know that.
The show.
That's a good one. I will say though, like rooting for GenG BLG, I feel like that's just the one matchup on everyone's bucket list that it must happen this Worlds. It's not a tournament without this matchup, but I don't know.
By the way,
I feel
could even argue it'll be better this time because it's in Europe. Like I actually think whether it was in China or Korea would add a whole dimension. Neutral. This is let's just have a neutral ground and just play it out, see who wins. Yeah, let's go for it.
No, that'd be baller. I don't know. For whatever reason, T1 went through all the LPL teams last year. I feel like BLG is going to go through all the LCK teams this year. I feel like BLG is like the one big hope for LPL to win. So yeah, it's gonna be interesting.
Good stuff.
Yeah.
Well, thanks for coming on the show, Cubby, and talking about the LCS and Tier 2, which was the surprising turn that we had at the end. But
yeah,
very, very valuable to hear your opinions on that.
Yeah, I appreciate it, guys. It was a lot of fun to come on. My League of Legends fandom started in season 2. I was watching the show when it was Coach CLG and Monty, so it was really cool to be a part of an episode. And yeah, hopefully, I will say, like for LCS, it's probably the most hope I've had since 2016 with TSM. So I feel like that's pretty reasonable. Like 2014 is always the best.
They're putting out some good teams this year. Like, as unwatchable as LCS has been at times over the past 2 years, I do not feel like. Do I think that there are serious flaws in both? Like, Liquid doesn't have the mid and bot lane carry potential, and FlyQuest, like they have the individual players, but they're lane mistakes and macro is a little sus. So you don't feel like you have the totally complete team. But I do think to your point at the start of this, it would be very surprising, especially because of how Swiss works, for there not to be a Western team in quarters. Like it's just much more likely to happen than not.
Yeah, no more like pray that you're NA 3 seed to like draw a kaiju in your group and then have them 6-0 and then like maybe sneak out. You know, none of that crap anymore. Yeah, actually like play out Swiss and then just pray for lucky draws. You know. Yeah.
So are you making any content over Worlds?
Yeah, so I do VOD reviews. I VOD reviewed every game for Challengers League and LCS on my YouTube, and I do it live on Twitch. I just like scrape the VODs and put them on YouTube. So I'm Cubby XX on both if you want to follow along. My plans to do, I'm not going to commit to all the games for Worlds because, you know, I do all the games for NACL and LCS. I talk about those, so it's like the bare minimum I can do as a broadcaster. But for this one, if there's a shitter, I might skip out on it and focus more on like the actual good games. So, yeah, I'm excited to go through the games and. Hopefully it's a great tournament. And yeah, thanks for having me on again, guys. It was a great time.
Well, check out his Twitch channel for those VOD reviews. We will be back. No viewer questions today, guys. We don't do them on the preview episodes, but we will be back next week after play-ins end. So we'll be talking about who made it out of play-ins, play-ins matches, as well as previewing the Swiss stage as we get into Worlds. And as usual, just so you guys understand, the day of SI will be flipping around during Worlds just because we have to hit those breaks in between like the first stage of Swiss and the second stage of Swiss, as well as the end of Swiss before quarterfinals, and then we'll be back at a normal time.
Also, technically, I will actually be at a CS event at one point, but we'll see about that. We'll figure that out that week.
We'll figure that. Maybe I have a different co-host that week.
Yeah, we'll see.
We'll see. We'll see. Because Thorin is going. Where are you going? Finland?
To Finland, yeah.
Nice.
All right.
Not a massive event. It's all right. It's all good.
Have fun.
They don't good into there, to be fair. So we'll see. Maybe
the last CS event I was at was actually MOG Columbus 16, and I talked with Snoopy. We got Snoopy like was consulting us for like building the esports program actually. So I don't know if you remember like him and Ocelot were like at the event. They like did something. Yeah, that was cool. That was a great event. I got to watch TL lose 15-7, 15-6. Yeah, they had 2 like huge throws. That was pretty memorable. So,
all right. Well, thanks, Cubby. We'll see you guys after play ends. Till then.